our Tuesday, August 11th, 2020, 5:30 work session. Please stand for our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We have 3 items on our agenda this evening. First, we'll get an update from our Riley County Police Department Police Director, Dennis Butler. Would you like to come on up? Nice to see you this evening.
You know, we say that all the time. It's good to see you, but it really is good to see you.
Right.
Good to be with you, I guess. I am going to take this off while I speak because I need my glasses and they fog up when I'm trying to read. I'm going to deviate just a little bit from what I normally do when I provide an update. I am going to provide an update, my laundry list that I usually bring, and answer any questions. You may have heard that I've been doing this, but about 2 weeks ago, the president of the International Association of Chiefs of Police, his name is Stephen Cass Stevens, sent out a letter to his membership. And when I read it, I was so moved by the message that I sent it to all of my employees. And then I thought, you know, as I go around the county visiting with governing bodies, and I think this is the 4th time, I'd like to read this to the governing body and anybody listening, and here's why. I want to preface the reading of this, it takes about 5 minutes, by saying that this makes me so appreciative of the community that I live and work in and of the citizens that make it what it is. And it's because of the things that we see almost every day on our news feeds and on the evening news, which I haven't been watching much lately, that really truly makes me appreciate how blessed I am to be here and be the director of the RCPD. As I read this, it may seem like it's a little one-sided. You're going to hear a little frustration, but if you listen carefully, and I'll point one paragraph out, it's very balanced in my opinion, and I just wanted to share this with you. It starts out with a quote from Thomas Paine, and the quote is, "These are the times that try men's souls." In the winter of 1776, Thomas Paine penned these words during a time of profound challenge among colonists fighting for the independence of this great nation. Paine continued, "The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country, but he that stands by it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman." That ends the quote, and then President Cass Stevens goes on and writes, "The summer soldier, or the sunshine patriot, is what we call today the fair weather fan. As they may be called today, are those without the fortitude, the pride, and the honor, and the strength to stand up for what is right and just in a free and open society. I find it incumbent on me, in fact, I am compelled by frank and righteous indignation to speak against the vitriol, the violence, and the abject inhumanity being heaped upon the men and women of law enforcement today. Despite my visceral urge not to, I turn on the news every night, read the social media posts, see the vulgar and profane anti-police graffiti, and listen to some elected leaders spew disparaging scorn and contempt on the very people who have so selflessly shouldered the mantle of selflessness, sacrifice, and devotion to service and the protection of every citizen of these United States. I watch as they are taunted and attacked by agitators posturing as protesters and stand their ground as bottles, bricks, and Molotov cocktails are hurled at them. I see them aid the very people who are disgorging hatred and brutality upon them. I see toddlers decked out in profanity-laced signs and T-shirts as they trail beside grown adults leading them down a path of hate. These acts are not productive protests. They are assaults on civility and the very fabric of American communities. I am sick, I am weary, I am enraged, I am insulted, and it must stop. What of these officers in Minnesota and Chicago and Portland? Outrageous, coordinated, directed, and potentially lethal assaults caught on film not just courtesy of bystanders, but by people who choose to focus on tactics used by officers to defend themselves, rather than identifying and condemning the violent crimes being committed in plain sight. As a chief, I tell them things will get better. Rise above it. Remember our calling to public service and all the good work you do each and every day. Don't let the negative drown out the immense good. I hope and pray that these words will help. I watch the men and women in a thankless job get up each day, put on their uniforms, go out into their communities, and seek to make a better, safer, and more just world. We know that our communities are filled with good people, and the violent acts of a few, while extremely disheartening, do not represent the views or beliefs of the whole. The same is true in the policing profession, and this is what's really important to listen to. We recognize that our profession faces many challenges and that some among us, a rare few, should not be wearing the badge. As police leaders, it is our job to hold these officers accountable and weed out those who should not be here. We are actively working to reform our profession, enhance our training and operations, and improve our connections with all members of our communities. Just as unprovoked violence by the police is despicable, so is unprovoked violence against the police. Both should be condemned and equally denounced. There is a peaceful process for speaking your mind and voicing your opinions. What we are witnessing in many communities around the globe is not it. Violence is never the solution. It does nothing to bring us together. It does absolutely nothing to advance positive relationships. It merely increases the divide. As Dr. Martin Luther King pointed out, an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind. Police officers, like the people they serve, are fathers, mothers, husbands, wives, daughters, and sons. I implore all involved to remember that and to focus on our humanity even as passions flare. Rather than letting tragedy continue to divide us, this is a time for us to come together as a community and a nation and move forward together. We must stop talking about the theoretical common ground and instead find it. It's not us and them, it's we. And I wanted to share that with you. Thank you for letting me read this. Before I move on to my list, I'd be happy to answer any questions or entertain any comments you might have about this. I want you to know, again, this kind of messaging, and I get a lot of it throughout what's been happening since Memorial Day weekend, just really struck a positive note with me. It was really inspirational. I wish I had penned these words. I felt that strongly about it, and I've been sharing it with our community really as a gesture of thanks for standing with us in dealing with things that we all are concerned about and not turning it into an us and them.
That's good. Thank you.
So on my normal update, and it's been a while, I wanted you to know that we have launched a promotional process for the position of captain, both in the jail and in the police department. Captain Fink, our patrol commander, is retiring at the end of the year. We've had an interim captain in the jail since I've arrived here. There's a lot of reasons why this hasn't been addressed yet, but we're about to. So hopefully in the next couple of months, we'll have some announcements for you. Along with that, once those promotions are made, it'll create promotional opportunities for the rank of lieutenant and sergeant as well. So we'll be coming back and making those announcements at the same time. I'm very happy to report that this week we have new dispatchers in training, and this fills all of our vacancies. You've heard me talk about this since I arrived. I didn't anticipate this being such a priority, but when I learned about our chronic turnover, an unhealthy rate of turnover in our dispatch center, communications center, I made this a priority, and my staff and I have been working on this. The law board was supportive of a plan we put into place in January, and at that time, I said, if we have these positions filled by the middle of 2021, I'll be very pleased. So we're way ahead of schedule, but always keep in mind that we do have other turnover that is normal, so we may have a couple of vacancies here and there, but we couldn't really sustain 6 or 7 vacancies a month out of 23 authorized positions. The Communications Center, as you know, serves all of the first responders in Riley County, and it's critically important that we have well-trained, stable dispatchers in that center. And so we're making a lot of progress that I didn't anticipate, and I'll keep you posted on how that's going. Also, the Fair and Impartial Policing group has met for a second time. They're still at the stage where they're just having general discussions and getting to know one another. There's members from the community, members from K-State. B. Stoney is the chair of the committee. I have 4 officers on this committee, Captain Kyle, Detective Sanders, Tyrone Townsend, and there's one more that's escaping me, I apologize, but we are going to continue meeting and talking about issues that our community and our profession are concerned about, trying to work together. So far, my understanding is the conversations have been very cordial and courteous and with the same mind of what we want to see happen. We started a Twitter campaign a week ago Monday regarding the topic of sexual assault and the policy that we enacted last year called Your Option, Your Control. This campaign was developed by our victim services advocate who was hired under a grant last year. And the demographic we're targeting is multiple. It's 24 years old and younger, which covers our college-age population and also many of our soldiers. And the campaign has varied messaging that is recurring. And that messaging is to promote the reporting of sexual assault, which is a drastically underreported crime, statistics on sexual assault, special messages to victims and survivors, and also community and state victim-centered resources that they can access when they need them. Information about what sexual consent really looks like, not what people might tell you it looks like, sometimes even members of your own family. Dispelling myths related to sexual assault, and just general safety tips. Some of the demographics aside from that age group are anyone of any gender, gender identity, and sexual orientation. So these messages will be tailored to all of these folks. And again, we just started this a week ago Monday, and we're starting to build a following, but please go on our Twitter account and follow and share some of these messages. As you know, we lost our PIO, Haley Rowland. Her husband is active duty military, was transferred to another installation, and so we're in the midst of that process to replace her. We'll let you know when we have somebody hired. As you know, since I saw you last in person, we've had several protests in the community, none recently, about what happened in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder in Minneapolis. I'm very happy to report, as you know, that these protests went very well in terms of safety, ensuring that those who wanted to message the community about their concerns could do it safely and without fear of anybody else interfering with that. You heard my letter I read from Chief Cass Stevens about agitators. We prepared for that possibility, but we were very fortunate that we didn't experience that. We did work with the organizers of all the protests to say, let us know what you need. We're just here to ensure your safety. And again, they worked well with us. I thought it was a very good collaboration as these protests occurred. And we could have more in the future, so we're ready to assist if we do have more that are planned. Also, I've started, like tonight, resuming in-person appearances at governing bodies, which I can't tell you how happy I am to do that. It's just nice to get back out and see people. I hadn't been to Leonardville, I think, since February. I'd been to the other ones a couple of times here and there, so it's nice to be back doing these semi-normal in-person meetings. And the last thing on my agenda is just to mention crime rates. During the midst of the lockdown, we saw historic drops in crime, calls for service on the order of 50 to 60%, traffic accidents being down over 60%. Never seen anything like that in my career. But with the lockdown being lifted and things returning to normal for a while before COVID made a comeback, we started seeing crime creep back up. And a lot of times people will say, well, is it because of the college students? Is it because of the soldiers? And I always am very careful to say no. Anytime you have a higher population, you're going to have more accidents, you're going to have more crime. And those soldiers and college students sometimes are the victims of those crimes. They're not the ones perpetrating them. So I always want to make that clear. We're not back to our historic levels of crime, but we're getting close. We're probably within 10 to 15% in most categories. Some we're right back where we were before. So while our officers got caught up in a lot of cases, they're back in the same workload that they were before for the most part. And again, I did say last thing, one other thing. We've had a lot of close calls where we thought we had some employees infected with COVID, where after they'd had an exposure to somebody who was. But we've been very fortunate so far. We've taken all the precautions that we can reasonably within the agency and out on the street. As you know, it was very difficult for us to reduce our services like a lot of places can or were forced to. So I was very concerned that at some point we'd have one, and we still may, but so far we haven't, and I'm very fortunate. We're very fortunate and thankful for that. So I'll answer any questions you might have about these topics or anything else.
Did you notice any kind of a spike of domestic violence? I've seen some articles in some places where I think it must have been where they were locked down longer and harder, so to speak. Did we notice any of that much around here?
No, we didn't see the dramatic drop like we did in most crime categories, but we didn't see a spike either. That surprised me as well based on information I was reading in other places. It was kind of shocking. In fact, on another topic, if I can address this, I was meeting with a candidate for elected office. Oftentimes when people are running, they'll come see me to learn about the RCPD and how we do things. They asked about mental health calls. And I really thought the mental health calls would be about the same or higher. And much to my surprise, between March and July, we actually saw a 27% decrease, and this is just raw call data, so there's no analysis here. We compared that with the same period last year, March through July, and then ran a 3-year average, and they all matched up to about a 27% decrease. So I was asked to speculate, and that's what all I'm offering now. Speculation could be several things. One, at the end of last year, the Pawnee Stabilization Unit opened. Maybe folks who normally might not have that kind of help are now getting it quicker without having to go to Osawatomie or find themselves in contact with us in a situation where maybe they've committed a crime and they're getting help, and therefore that's why calls are down. It could be because people were afraid to leave their homes and seek services for fear of being infected if they did, and so they just never called us or never interacted with somebody who called because of that behavior. So it's really too early to tell. You know, usually when we provide statistics on anything, we can tell you what it's doing now, but we usually look back 3 to 5 years because we think that's a better, more accurate gauge on what the trend is. It's just too early to say if this is a permanent decrease or not. But
any ideas if the number of suicides is any higher this year than previous years?
I don't have that data, so I'd have to look at that and get back to, give it to the city manager and he could forward it to you.
If it's not any different, then don't worry about it. But
anecdotally, I haven't noticed that we've seen a spike in suicides.
Director Butler, Commissioner Estabrook. Back to, I guess, a couple things at the beginning. The Chief Stevens letter kind of ties into what I was thinking along the lines of, you know, we can't, we always try to seek more of a perfect situation, but at the same time we balance getting, not letting the perfect get in the way of the good. And could you speak to a little bit more of what are some good things? I know you mentioned the fair and impartial policing. I think that was somewhat relatively new, and maybe some of the outcome or goals, if there are any, of that group, or other ways the community through, is it CAB, or other ways the community is working kind of hand in hand as a we with the police to make us all a little bit better.
You know, some of you may have heard me say this before. I always like to stress and emphasize this. The Fair and Impartial Policing Group, for example, that was scheduled to meet back at the beginning of the year. This is a group that's met before. This is not a reaction to our current events. And so there was a proactive effort underway for us to talk about things just because we felt like we had some work we did a few years ago, haven't really met again. Let's start meeting again to see if there's any new issues. So it's important to know that at this stage, obviously the recent events are going to be part of those discussions. And I want you as a governing body to know that I never, and I've always viewed this in my own professional role. Anytime I've been in any position, no matter what it is, or as a chief, a captain, a lieutenant, I'm always working on things thinking we're going to finally get everything addressed and I can put my feet up on the desk figuratively. And we never get there. There's always room for improvement. And I've talked to a lot of people about the use of the word reform, and in some ways the way it's used, it carries a negative connotation, but if you look up the definition of it, it really is about improvement. It's about evolving. Policing has evolved and improved in the 40 years I've been doing this quite a bit, and all for the better, I think. You know, the use of force. Today, I don't know if any of you were on the Power Lunch Zoom today. I was the keynote speaker. So here's another example. I talked about our core values. It was something I was going to do in person at a luncheon earlier this year with the chamber. So I put up some slides, talked about how they were developed and how we use them, not just a poster on the wall, but really use them and how we conduct ourselves and evaluate our employees. But because of current topics, I also put up data about our use of force and also about internal affairs. And I made the point that all this data that I was showing today, this is data that's on our website. This is data that's reported to the law board on a regular basis. So this isn't a reaction or a knee-jerk to what's happening and forcing other departments to do that. So I think the department has been very proactive in being transparent, being accountable to these things. One thing I failed to mention today, for example, about our use of force, every use of force requires an after-action review. The document is a minimum of 7 pages. Every supervisor in the chain of command, including the training lieutenant, reviews it, and I'm the last level of review. And this is done to make sure that the use of force was conducted within our department policy. And if we find any slight variations or major ones, then an internal affairs investigation can be launched to find out what happened and what accountability should be attached to that. These after-action reports for uses of force and pursuits as well, vehicle pursuits, probably take up more of my administrative time than anything I do. I'm not saying that to complain. I'm saying that to point out that even this is important to me that we do this right, and if we find somebody underperforming or performing outside of policy, that we address it, and we do. The one thing I've noticed about these reports that start with the sergeant through the lieutenant, the captain, the assistant director, the training lieutenant, and me is, as I'm reading it in the beginning of what happened, I can see sometimes things we could have done better, and I'm thinking, I'm going to put this in my remarks to make sure this is done. Almost always, somebody along the way has already addressed it. They've already done the remedial training, they've already done the counseling, it's rare, very rare, I mean, that I have to say, why haven't we addressed this? That makes me very confident in the process that we have and the staff adhering to the standards that are in writing. Oftentimes organizations have stuff in writing, but they're not practicing it. Accreditation is part of the reason why we do. We are forced to, whether we want to or not. If we're going to maintain our accreditation, we have to do these things thoroughly and appropriately. So I could go on, we could talk about this quite a bit. I'm not going to suggest for a second that we, and you've heard me say this too, we are not perfect. We have a bunch of human beings working down at the police department, including me. We make mistakes all the time, but we have mechanisms in place to identify it early and address it and try to prevent it from getting out of hand or affecting the service we provide to you where it turns out badly.
I'll just let you know that some of the feedback I got from those initial meetings with that group you're talking about, the fair and impartial policing, was the reaction was not so much. It was they were very excited that the RCPD, the representatives that you mentioned on that committee, were so willing to meet again so quickly and continue the dialogue and have that. So that was refreshing to hear on that point. The other thing I didn't want it to go away is earlier this spring, the department had scheduled some, I know there's been various trainings, but one that stands out to me is the CIT training, and we just had to push that on down the line because of the pandemic. Don't want to let that go away because we of course our goal is to get as many crisis intervention trainings in for the mental health in our RCPD. So just keep that on your radar. I know there's probably nothing no 8-ball that you can shake and predict when we'll be able to do that again, but
Yeah, we have not taken our eye off of that ball. I want you to know that this was originally scheduled in April. It would have been our first local 40-hour CIT certification class. Our own officers, other first responders were invited to attend, and law enforcement from other areas would be eligible. So we had to reschedule it to July. So we had it rescheduled to July. It had to be postponed again. I don't have a new date, but in going to another meeting with some of my colleagues who are also heavily involved in CIT, I learned that CIT International had suspended all national training. And the main reason is this training involves a ton of role-playing. It's very critically important to have role-playing in this training class. So because of that, all training nationally is suspended. This is critically important to me. I started a CIT and held training like this in Ottawa when I was there, and it wasn't happening here when I arrived here, and we had planned it, and we have not, believe me, we're going to do it, and we're going to do it at least annually after we get this first one off the ground.
Thank you. Did you have anything, Linda? So, thank you, Director Butler. I did have a question. I just wanted you to tell me a little bit more. You said there was a close call regarding an employee getting COVID. What exactly do you mean? Like, was it when they were working on duty, or was it, I just wanted a few more details on how the testing went and was there contact tracing involved? And you said it was not an issue. I just wanted you to talk about that a little bit.
Actually, every close call we've had has usually involved a family member who has been tested and found to be positive, somebody in their household or somebody that they're related to that they spent time with. I think we've had one situation, it was really early on before we had a good idea what an actual contact needs to be for someone to become infected. But whenever we know that an employee has been near, really close to somebody, especially in their own household, who has been tested positive, they immediately are sent home if they've come in. Usually they don't come in. They're to distance themselves from that person, get tested right away, and then we have to wait for the testing to come back. So that, I would bet that's probably been 90% of the situation, something along those lines, not where we know they've been near someone at work who we found out was infected and tested positive. So that's the general scenario.
Okay, because oftentimes those are the ones we want to get tested first.
Absolutely.
Like you said, you can't afford to have even a few officers
No.
Off duty, especially related to COVID. And hopefully you are receiving some Spark funds. And I know you discussed, I heard Captain Kyle discuss the JAG funds, JAG grant that you received. And hopefully there's more money coming that way related to COVID, because those are resources which are not anticipated but are necessary for the foreseeable future. So.
Yeah, I hope so. We had one JAG grant that we get every year. It's almost guaranteed. There's a formula that's used based on your population and crime rates. If we had more crime, we'd get more money. I'm glad we don't have more crime. But so we had applied, and we had directed that towards some things that weren't COVID. But then the federal government in their first stimulus bill earmarked, at least in our formula, about $63,000, and we've dedicated almost all but $19,000, I think, at this point. We're going to spend the rest for all COVID-related materials. We did put in an application for the Sparks funding. I understand Thursday is when they're supposed to come back to the commission and talk about how that's being allocated. So we'll find out then if we're going to be getting any more funding.
Sounds good. You did a nice job this afternoon with and I think it would be good when we have another city-county meeting to present the use of force that you did. I remember I believe our Brad Schoen did that once before, but I'm sure things have changed since then. And this seems like a timely issue to talk about it at one of the city-county meetings.
You know, I'd always be happy to do that. If you watch the whole thing, you know, when you look at some of those graphs, you look at it and go, okay, that's interesting. But then when I provided the analysis that I think it means about, you know, citizen reports versus internal reports and that ratio, that tells me, you know, that it's a healthy organization when internally we're generating a lot more complaints than citizens are. That means we take it seriously, we're addressing things before they escalate or become a situation where it's affecting service to you. Most people don't look at it that way, but I've seen those numbers inverted in departments in Kansas, and right away I look at that and I go, wow, they're not taking care of business before it affects the citizens. That's why they have more citizen complaints.
Yeah. And
So-
exactly defining use of force. We all go to different directions.
Oh, yeah.
When we see use of force and all the
Yeah.
levels turn. But yeah, thank you for presenting this evening. We always appreciate your update.
Sure, you're welcome. You'll have a good
Any
evening.
other questions?
Yeah, I don't have a question. I just wanted to mention that I did attend as an observer a couple of the demonstrations that were down in Triangle Park, and I just wanted to say that I was very impressed with the way your officers ensured public safety. An excellent job on the part of RCPD and when those things took place. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And again, thank you for your support. What I read in the letter really applies here, and I'm very thankful for all the governing bodies and the citizens for not intentionally putting us in a position where you'd see us on the evening news or somebody's social media post. So I don't take that for granted.
Thank you once again. Appreciate it.
Thank you. One quick question. I know you have Aggieville parking on the agenda. Do you need me to stay for that? Do you anticipate any
That's
questions?
completely up to
Okay.
you.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So, like Director Butler mentioned, we do have the Aggieville Parking Management Plan update, and Jason Hilders, our Deputy City Manager, as well as Andrew Vitter, Walker Parking, from Walker Parking, will also be presenting. I'm sure I did not say your name right, so please correct me once you get up here. Go ahead, Jason, thank you.
That's all right, Mayor. Yeah, Andrew Vidor with Walker is with me here this evening, and he will be making majority of the presentation. The distinction, I guess I just wanted to bring to your attention right away, we have two phases to this. We have a phase in which we would like to implement starting this December when construction starts, anticipating parking garage construction and Rally House parking lot starting in December. That would carry on for 12 months. When the garage is open, now we talk about phase 2 of the parking strategy moving forward. Tonight, we're really trying to get feedback and direction for what staff needs to do over the next 2 months, 3 months possibly, to get ready for parking management between December of 20 and December of 21. We'll talk throughout the calendar year of 21 about how we're going to transition away from even that temporary parking strategy to a more permanent parking strategy once the garage is open. So Andrew's going to highlight a lot of items tonight. Direction and feedback would be appreciated on how to approach December of 20 through December of 21. So with that, I will introduce Andrew, and he will start working through the PowerPoint presentation. Andrew?
Thanks, Jason. Good evening. I'm Andrew Vidor. I'm our Director of Planning at Walker Restoration Consultants. I'm based in Denver, Colorado, and it's good to see you again. City leadership and staff, good to see you again as well. So thank you for being here. We initially presented some of this information to you last fall. Jason mentioned that there are 2 distinct phases, and in the presentation, it will be clear which phase we're talking about, and I'll make sure that the transition is clear between phase 1 and phase 2. So you'll be able to hopefully provide city staff some direction on phase 1. Phase 2 is intended just to be an overview of some initial strategies, and as Jason mentioned, there will certainly be more discussion on those topics. It's important first to understand why parking management is important, and particularly why it's important to Aggieville. Aggieville has some different circumstances in the way it operates and what its neighbors look like as does downtown area. We want to make sure that we can provide good customer access. And good customer access comes in the form of those visiting Aggieville, the non-residents, the non-business owners, and the non-employees. We want to make sure that we can have good turnover for the on-street parking spaces, which is different than the turnover that's required for the off-street parking spaces. On-street parking is intended to be a shorter term accommodation for visitors to Aggieville that might be having stays generally less than 2 hours or around 2 hours. Those that park in Aggieville for longer periods of time, if you're intending to stay for a half a day or a day, maybe you have a hair appointment or a couple of appointments or visits that you would want to make in Aggieville, the good accesses with the off-street parking and the 3 current parking lots, soon to be 2 parking lots, and then 2 parking lots and a parking garage. At the same time, we want to make sure that we have equity for our employees, our business owners, and our residents in Aggieville. So with a good parking management plan, we can have equity for all in all those different user groups, although the equity comes in different forms for different users because they have different needs. One way to do that is through consistent and regular enforcement in the Aggieville area. In order to do that, we're providing a transitional approach through various phases, phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 2 being the more permanent parking management strategy, and then phase 1 being during construction. As a reminder of the current parking restrictions, parking is not regularly enforced in Aggieville, and that's for a number of reasons. It has to do with staffing resources. It has to do with seasonal variations between in-session and out-of-session schools. Just in the last few weeks, regular parking enforcement started again in Aggieville to enforce the time limits. Most of the on-street parking is currently limited to 2 hours. That's shown in the map here as the yellow lines on street. The cyan or light blue lines are free and unlimited parking, predominantly on the south side of Aggieville. I should also point out that the entire park area, the Manhattan City Park, is all free, unlimited, and restricted parking currently. And on the north side of Aggieville, the east side of campus, K-State, shown there in purple, are areas where there are current parking restrictions and residential zones. So phase 1 of active parking management. Phase 1 of active parking management really focuses on the construction phase. So that construction phase includes the hotel construction, which is currently happening, the road construction, and the soon-to-be construction of the parking garage. The purpose of this transitional approach for parking management is to make sure that we understand and bring to light that there will be impacts from construction. There already are impacts from construction, and there will be more impacts from construction once the parking garage project starts later this fall. At the same time, we want to make sure that we're able to continue to increase turnover of those on-street parking spaces so our customers and our guests and our visitors in Aggieville have easy access and convenient access, particularly for those that have shorter lengths of stay and will not be parking there all day, for example, like a business owner or an employee may. We also want to be able to address the pressure from K-State University and the pressures that we see in Aggieville as well as the north side of City Park in reducing that spillover from campus. That's going to be even more important when we reduce the number of parking spaces within Aggieville due to the garage construction. It's also important to recognize that we're setting the stage for additional parking management strategies. So we don't want to go from nothing to everything in one foul swoop. It's difficult for your citizens and your business owners and your employees and constituents to make a hard transition like that. We want to ease into this by setting some rules, beginning regular and routine enforcement in order to start to change user behaviors. And those user behaviors, again, come in different groups. It's the employees, it's the business owners, it's the residents, it's the university faculty, staff, and students, and it's the customers of Aggieville. At the same time, we want to make sure that our residents in Aggieville and adjacent to Aggieville are not negatively impacted, because those residents, some of them don't have access to parking on their property, and we want to make sure that we can have a reliable place for them to park when they come home for the evening or during the day, when they're at home, depending on their work and play schedules. So I'll pull back up this map, same map as before, although you'll see some different colored lines and boxes, and we'll walk through those. These parking management restrictions and modifications are for phase 1 only. So that's during the remainder of hotel construction, while the parking garage is under construction, and then the remainder of this season's streetscape construction. I'll point out a couple of things that are somewhat different. If you remember, the on-street parking was a combination primarily of 2-hour limits and free and unlimited parking. Our recommendation is to go to a consistent strategy across all the streets in the boundary of Aggieville, as well as those adjacent to it. So those blue lines or those cyan lines you saw before are now all yellow. Previously and currently, the time restrictions on street in Aggieville are 2 hours. We're recommending that all those yellow lines in those areas in this district become 3-hour time limits. And you may say, well, why would we want to increase the time limits when it's already 2 hours? Well, I told you we want to be mindful of the impacts to Aggieville and the Aggieville businesses during construction by trying to limit the impacts and frustrations that may come with that. Because we're removing the parking lot in order to construct the garage, we're going to lose physical parking spaces within Aggieville. To address that, we want to make sure that those on-street spaces have a little bit longer length of stay for those that might be going to dinner at one location and then possibly going for dessert. This is again during the 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. hours. So dinner may not be as big of an issue, but the lunchtime crowds, which is where the largest impact in Aggieville occur with parking strains. So we want to make sure that we're not impacting them negatively, but we're providing a consistent strategy for all of those on-street parking spaces. We'll move down to City Park. You'll see that City Park has 2 different colored boxes. There's blue boxes and green boxes. Predominantly, the north end of the park is the area that we hear consistently has challenges with non-park users parking in them for extended periods of time. There's currently no restrictions in City Park, so you're able to park there all day. The challenge is we need to make sure that we have parking available as a first priority to customers, business owners, employees, and residents in Aggieville. So our suggestion is implementing a time limit as well as no overnight parking on the north side of City Park in order to try to minimize the impacts from spillover from the university. That also addresses the overnight concerns of poor behavior in the park by restricting overnight parking. We'll move into the 2 city lots that are within Aggieville. Those are shown as red boxes. Continuing to have a 3-hour time limit in those parking lots during the day from 8 to 5 p.m. Now you may say, well, what if I'm an employee or I'm a business owner, I'm a resident? I need to park for longer than 3 hours because I have an 8-hour work shift, or maybe it's only a 4-hour work shift. Well, you'll see that there's some areas that have black crosshatching in it. That occurs in both of those parking lots and then along Fremont Street. Our way to address that is through permit programs. So business owners and employees can be issued permits to park unrestricted time periods in those 2 lots and that section along Fremont Street. That allows the all-day parkers that have a reason to be in Aggieville access to park unrestricted. It also discourages the improper use of parking in Aggieville if you're not doing business in Aggieville, predominantly from the university. Now again, we're not trying to have an us against them mentality, with that being us, the city, and them, the university. We're trying to make sure that we're providing primary access to Aggieville as K-State has its own parking resources. So in addition to that, we want to make sure that we're able to extend into some of the neighborhoods that could potentially be impacted by spillover from Aggieville and spillover from the university, some extended areas of residential only parking during those daytime hours. I think before we move forward, I want to see if there's questions about phase 1 parking time limits and restrictions. There's additional information to go with this as it applies to both strategies, but because city staff are looking for input on that, maybe we stop for questions and then we can go back to the next phase as well as the other additional information.
Mayor?
Yes.
Yes, Linda Morse. I had a question about the north side of City Park, and in your materials, it just talks about parking on the north side of City Park, which to me means Fremont Street. It doesn't mean really what your language should say, speak to is the north what? Quarter or whatever of the north part of City Park, because that's what you're claiming. What about Fremont Street? What are you planning there?
Yeah, so that's a good question, Commissioner Morrissey. To clarify, the north side of City Park is the northern portion inside the City Park limits. So the ring road in City Park, north of that, it's called Central Park Road. Okay. So within the actual limits of the park, those parking lots, both the improved parking as well as the gravel parking, think from the baseball fields north to Fremont. To address your question about Fremont Street would again, it's currently free and unlimited in terms of the length of stay you can park. Our recommendation is to be consistent with the rest of the streets within the Aggieville boundaries, to be 3-hour parking, no overnight parking as within the rest of Aggieville except for the lots, but also be able to provide the residential parking permit program and employee parking program on those streets.
On both sides, okay.
Yes, ma'am.
And are any additional lots planned in City Park? Are you going to be creating more parking space?
I defer to city staff on that question.
Just to jump back real quick, on Fremont, we're just allowing parking on one side currently, and that would probably remain. I don't think Public Works is going to be excited about putting parking on both sides. We moved that to the south side recently, and that's worked out very well, so we would probably just keep it on one side, on the south side. Parking lots adjacent to Wilson and Miller are gravel lots with a ring of blocks. If we go to this, we're more than likely going to need to do something there to delineate where to park. You could have cars getting trapped in there on a very busy evening, so we'll need to address those 2 parking lots, yes. Everything else, I believe, and I'll look to Eddie, is pretty much laid out the way it should be used in the park by identified stalls.
So when will you be like putting those concrete bumper things, or you're not gonna pave it?
No,
Okay, good.
no.
All right,
Much like we did out at Annenberg.
okay.
We put down some,
Mark it somehow.
yeah, the blocks so people know where to head in park.
The short term.
Yep.
Okay. And then, I had a question about the parking, the map you have up, and we see the red boxes, which are current parking lots in the Aggieville area. And not only are they red, but they also have hash marks, which say that they are for resident permit parking. So there'll be no public parking in them at all. It'll all be resident parking, residential. So the people who live in the apartment complexes and around, within Aggieville, this will be their parking. These 3 lots will be dedicated to them. Is that what that's what I'm asking?
So to clarify that, Commissioner Morris, it is not only for residential parking. It's for all public parking, would remain all public parking. That is an area, those 2 lots, as well as Fremont Street,
Yeah.
are areas in which if you had a permit, you would be exempt from those 3-hour limits. So if you were an employee or resident, you would be issued a permit. When parking ambassadors come through to verify the 3-hour limit, they would see that you are permitted to be in there for an indefinite period of time. So they would be exempt from those time limits.
So you could stay overnight?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Any more questions? Yes, go ahead, Commissioner
The,
Hudson.
Commissioner Hattasol, the 3-hour extended time makes a lot of sense in the evening where you're gonna take plenty of time to eat and hang around for a drink and ice cream and stuff. But during the day, is that really, I can't imagine people needing that extra hour, and that would just give the people that wanna run over to K-State and take a class that much more ability to, I'm curious as to, yeah, after 5 it makes sense, before 5, I still don't get why you wanna extend it from 2 to 3 hours.
Sure, so these strategies are, again, only from 8 to 5 p.m. So after 5 p.m., there's no time limit restrictions.
Oh, wait, okay, so, okay.
The idea of moving from 2 hours to 3 hours is to be able to minimize the disruption to Aggieville visitors and guests. It would not prohibit someone that is not parking in Aggieville to potentially park in Aggieville. But through active and routine enforcement, again, we're starting to train new behaviors, and we'll talk about some campaigns that will help educate all of the citizens and students within the community as part of this program.
Okay, so now we need to clarify that some more. So you just said that the 3-hour limit would be 8 to 5, and then what happens after 5 o'clock? It's a free-for-all? No. Yes,
Just like it is today.
which is
Just like it is today. 8 to 5, Monday through Friday.
the only time the 2-hour isn't,
It's the only
supposed to be
time
enforced.
we have parking enforcement officers on duty.
so if somebody shows up at 5:01, can they leave their car there overnight?
If they show up at 2:30, they're in the clear.
Okay, so as long as,
Anytime after 2, because that 3-hour capacity will stop at 5.
okay,
So we talked earlier, and this has been the dynamic in Aggieville for a long time. Most of the parking restrictions really are targeted 8 to 5 Monday through Friday, that noon hour crowd. Really between 11 and 2 is where your main policing is coming in terms of trying to get stalls to turn over. If you arrive at 8, the earliest you can get a ticket is 11. If you arrive at 2, you're not going to get enforcement. It's really between 9, 10, 11, noon, 1, and 2 where predominantly the enforcement takes place. You can still get a ticket being there at 3 or 4. You just have to be there for 3 hours. And most of the traffic that we see is the lunch crowd that really comes into Aggieville. Now, sometimes that lunch crowd stays and becomes the evening crowd too. Weekends, obviously, we're not down there patrolling. Fridays, that's predominantly the day. A lot of activity stays in the afternoon, so there are some folks that have to be careful there. But getting into the mindset, it's Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 that's when we have our resources there.
Okay, all right. Thanks for clarifying that, both of you.
So I have, thank you, Mark. I have a couple of questions. With K-State not having McCain events, or a lot of events not being taking place this semester, maybe even spring semester, that leaves a lot of parking at Beach Museum and that parking lot available across from the Bluemont Hotel. What's to say that people can't just park there? That's where sometimes we park and go to a restaurant and such, and they don't really check overnight or anything of that sort. So when you talk about modifying behavior, I don't know if that's possible in this COVID period, since there aren't any events when you're talking about phase one. The other part to that question is, there's a lot of areas that you have, actually there's no overnight in any of the areas that I see. When Commissioner McKee was on our city commission a year ago, he brought to our attention, several people, if they drink too much, they want to leave their car there and take Uber home. What happens to that? Do they get fined? Is there a fee for overnight? Does their car get towed? What happens if they should leave their car overnight?
Good question, Mayor Reddy. And I do remember that conversation well. The discussion was, and some of the concerns by the commissioners at that time, was to be able to provide the opportunity for people to make what I would call smart decisions and not get back in the car and drive. I remember a conversation from 2017 in which there was some data presented from the police department that indicated that the number of DUIs issued originating from Aggieville was down as a result of people making, again, good decisions and taking Ubers or Lyft home, or calling a friend, or using the university's shuttle program. To address those concerns, we do not have currently identified in the off-street parking lots overnight parking restrictions. So that would allow someone to make a good behavior decision and not get behind the wheel during the evenings. On street, we're still suggesting no overnight parking, so operation and maintenance occurrences from Public Works, like street sweeping, for example, could occur during those hours without being impacted by those vehicles. But the off-street facilities during phase one, and we'll talk about in phase two, does not have any overnight restrictions, so people can
Okay.
make those good choices.
And like I said, there might be a lot of parking in that K-State parking lot too. And we'll see what happens with that. But you're expecting the construction to start sometime here and the garage to open up when, do you think?
At the end of 2021,
End of 20?
so around December of next year, and then start construction around December of this year.
Okay, good. And one more thing. As the Marriott comes up, one of the provisions they told us about, and I think we signed on to, is once the garage is built, they were going to provide a few parking spaces at designated times. And I don't know when that kicks in or when their garage finishes or anything of that sort. I don't know if, Jason, can you give us a little bit of information on that?
Sure, they're still targeting April of 2021 for an opening, so it wouldn't be before then.
Okay,
So as they near completion, we have every intention to sit down with their management and see what they're able to offer the community for parking.
so we need to think about this at least until April of 2021 or something of that sort.
Yep.
Thank you.
Any other questions on phase one parking restriction modifications? There's more that goes with this that I'd like to share as well.
Linda Morse again. Yusha, I was going to just add that I know, currently at least, unless there are changes, K-State does not enforce parking after 5 o'clock.
They don't, yes.
So unless
yeah.
they're planning a policy change of some kind that would affect Aggieville, as far as I'm concerned, the campus parking there in that area
available.
is available, yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I was trying to say, is that it will be available for at least the duration of 2020 and possibly spring of 2021, is what I was alluding to when we talk about modifying behavior after 5. But either way, thank you.
So we'll move on to phase 2. Phase 2 being the long-term parking management plan. This is once construction is complete of the parking garage at the end of 2021, as well as the completion of the hotel that's under construction. Again, the purpose of these parking management programs, the long-term strategy, is to provide equity for all of the users of Aggieville. We do that with continued enforcement, routine and regular enforcement, as well as expansion of the current hours. So beyond that 11 to 2 hours, it's from 8 to 5. It also allows the employees and the residents access to parking beyond those time limits. It also considers an option to implement paid parking. We'll talk about that opportunity and how it can support the cost associated with the ongoing operation and maintenance of parking management program, as well as for the parking garage. So a couple things change. Again, the same map, a couple different colors. I'll draw your attention primarily to 2 areas that are different. You'll see the blue, the dark blue areas within the Aggieville boundaries. Previously, those were red boxes with black cross-hatching. Now we have 3 boxes that are blue with black cross-hatching. The third on the left there is the location of the new 500 space parking garage. The other 2 are the parking lots that are there today. Those go to unlimited timed parking. So not just 3 hours from what happens in phase 1, but it also goes to a paid strategy. So it's a pay to park for your use of the services. The red lines currently or previously were yellow in the core of Aggieville. Those go back to 2-hour time limited parking. And that's because we have just brought online effectively over 400 new parking spaces in Aggieville from the construction of the garage. Those spaces are also moving to a paid strategy. And that paid strategy helps support the ongoing costs of the parking operations, which we'll spend some additional time talking about to focus in on that. It still restricts on the outer boundaries of Aggieville. You see the yellow lines. It still has time restrictions to not impact the neighbors negatively and the residents that live adjacent to Aggieville by having time limited parking and no overnight parking. Again, no overnight parking on any of the city streets. City Park remains time limited on the north side as to not create spillover from the paid parking areas. So if you imagine the core of Aggieville being paid, the periphery being time limited. If the core is paid, people that are trying to avoid the user fees for the services that they're being provided would tend to spread out across those paid boundaries and into the neighborhoods, creating disruption to the neighbors, as well as disruption to the park users on the north side of City Park.
You, Linda Morse, you have mentioned that the parking garage would have 500 spaces, and then this most recent, you said 400, and in some of the material, it's around 300.
So the total capacity,
Yeah.
Commissioner Morris, is around 500 spaces.
Okay.
I say less than 500 spaces because there's existing spaces on that lot now. So that's the total new spaces that didn't exist previously in Aggieville. So there's not 500 total new spaces because that surface lot has, about 150 spaces. So it's about 350 to 400 new spaces to Aggieville.
Okay, Commissioner had a soft question. Okay, so you said to prevent the spillover into the neighborhood, so the yellow stuff east of Aggieville that has a 2-hour time limit, is that gonna be free, but you can only stay there 2 hours?
Correct, Commissioner Hatzel, yes, 2 hours. But also, it would be a permitted zone, so the residents that live in those areas or adjacent to those areas shown with those yellow lines would be exempt from those time limits.
And so, okay, that's the same thing with the City Park blue lots, 2-hour time limit, and then you get a ticket after that.
Yes, Commissioner.
Okay, so the next question becomes, so the hatched blue ones are also gonna be the permits for employees? Is that what? is that gonna
Employees and
continue?
residents,
Employees, okay,
and those employees and residents with permits would be exempt from time limits, but it would still be public parking.
okay.
There could also be different parking rates for employees and residents from the daily parking rate, for example.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Any additional questions on the parking restrictions before we move on to the other programs as part of this?
Doesn't look like it.
Okay. So enforcement doesn't happen on its own. Currently, you have 2 parking enforcement officers that patrol during certain hours of the day. Our consideration to you is to expand the number of what we call parking ambassadors that patrol Aggieville. We're going to need more than the current parking enforcement officer. We would like to expand the role and the services that they provide. We talk about a parking ambassador, which is different than a parking enforcement officer, because a parking ambassador serves additional functions and capacities. Sure, their role is to enforce the time limits from 8 to 5, Monday to Friday, but it's also to educate the customers, the employees, and the employers of the parking program and the parking management strategies within Aggieville and why it's important for their success as a business owner, as an employee, or how it benefits you as a customer by being able to provide good and convenient access to parking in Aggieville. These parking ambassadors are trained in conflict resolution, so they have de-escalating tactics if they were to receive a ticket. You may have seen the series a number of years ago called Parking Wars in Pennsylvania, in Pittsburgh, where they just were showing how rough and tough they could be as a parking enforcement officer. Well, this conflict resolution helps de-escalate those situations from people that might be receiving a ticket. They're also trained in what's going on in Aggieville, the different events, the different activities, where different businesses are. Education is a process that takes time. And through this transitional approach, we're going to need to teach people that have been coming to Aggieville for years and years and years the new policies, the new time restrictions, and the reason behind that. Their job is to educate rather than immediately issue citations and issue warnings. Our goal here through good active parking management is to reduce the number of citations that are issued in Aggieville because we have a higher compliance rate. This picture on the top right, it's a yellow card. It's actually from the City of Hancock Police Department in Michigan. This is a courtesy card through education that they offer by putting on the dashboard about what they did wrong and what the policy is so they can learn. A lot of times we'll find that people are not intentionally trying to violate the restrictions, they just don't know about the restrictions. They have distinctive and friendly uniforms, so they're approachable. They're customer service focused, and they're really there to do more than just write parking tickets. While that is still one of their primary roles and responsibilities, it puts a good connotation on parking management and makes parking in Aggieville and beyond, if it's expanded in the city, a pleasant experience. We talked about the opportunity to pay for parking on street. We'll talk about off-street parking as well. There's 2 primary ways in which that could be done. You're probably most familiar with the old horse hitching posts from the 1800s, which turned into parking meters thereafter. Technology has come a long way in order to be able to pay for parking. The parking meters you see on the left are a couple of examples. They are not at each individual parking space. They're located on a city block, so on each side of the street along a city block. It doesn't require a lot of intensive infrastructure to put in place. They run off of batteries. They use a solar connection. So as the streetscape design in Aggieville moves forward, this is a flexible way to be able to accommodate that and integrate it into the streetscape design. These meters can accept credit cards, coins, cash. We find that credit card use is predominant enough today that credit card only machines are typically adequate to support that. Although if you believe it's important to make sure that all of your users that are parking in Aggieville can pay with any form of cash, credit card, or coin, you're able to accept that. The other strategy is to use a mobile application. K-State recently rolled out a mobile phone application that they're putting in play, which eliminates the need to go to a parking meter. It eliminates the need to pull out that pocket full of quarters, or it eliminates the need to pull out that credit card to pay for your parking transaction. You can sit in your car, pull up the app on your phone, initiate your parking session for the intended length of stay, which in the final parking management program, if you're parking on street, would be 2 hours. You pay that rate, it bills your credit card that you have set up on file, and you can walk away. It also allows you the ability to be sitting at lunch and realize that I only paid for an hour of parking, and boy, we're having a lot of fun catching up. Let's have dessert afterwards. And extend your parking time right from your phone without having to rush to get the bill or have somebody rush away from the conversation to go feed the meter. This can be implemented at relatively low to no cost for the parking app. One suggestion is that for consistency across all of Manhattan, the same app can be used as that being used at K-State. So whether you're parking at K-State or parking in Aggieville or down the road parking in a paid parking zone in Manhattan or the airport, you have a consistent paid parking experience. The technology vendors, there's several technology vendors. Think about buying a car. You know, you have the option to buy a Cadillac, a Ford, a Chevy, a Toyota. It becomes preference at that point. They all provide the same functionalities. It's just which brand do you like better. I say that in simple terms, but when it comes down to picking some of these companies, if the consumer is just looking to pay for their parking contactless, which is going to become more and more important coming out of COVID, that this is a great strategy to do that. The off-street parking, so the 2 parking lots as well as the parking garage, we're suggesting using the same technology strategy and the same technology company as that going into the airport later this fall. Again, there's multiple different vendors that can do this, but from a consistency perspective across Manhattan and the user experience, we want to provide consistency and reliability in what the experience will be for the consumer. So that starts with pulling up to the gate at the parking lot of the parking garage, pulling your ticket, and walking away to go do your shopping or dining within Aggieville. When you come back, you have several ways that you can pay for your parking. You can go to what is called a pay on foot machine. You'll see this later this fall in the terminal at the airport, and you can pay with credit card there. And then when you go to the exit lane, your ticket is already paid for and you can drive away and have a nice trip home. A second option is to have a validation program in which Aggieville businesses can provide validations or discounts for their parking session as a result of shopping or dining with them or conducting some other business in Aggieville. It's a great option for advertising for business owners to say, come to my restaurant because I validate your parking and you won't have to pay for that, versus another business that may not choose to participate in that program. The third option is to pay with your credit card when you're exiting the lane. And the fourth and last option is if you choose to deploy a mobile application, which is our recommendation, how easy is it that I can pull that ticket walk to what I'm doing, and on my way back, I scan the ticket and pay for it on my phone, never have to pull my credit card out. Great contactless solution to avoid the transmission of disease spread, also widely popular with frequent visitors to any parking facility and the younger generation. I use it on a regular basis in places I go across the country, and it's a super convenient way to take care of that transaction. And again, it's consistent with that of the airport. So whether you're parking in Aggieville or parking at the airport, that user experience is the same. And we believe that's critically important to the success of a managed parking program, is to know what to expect. So we know that there's going to have to be some investment in order to manage parking in Aggieville. Managing parking in Aggieville is important from an economic development perspective. Studies show that well-managed parking increases property values and increases developable land. So it's an added ancillary benefit to Aggieville in the future as Aggieville continues to grow. There's two primary costs. There's initial investment cost and the ongoing cost to operate the program. From a personnel standpoint, from a staffing perspective, in order to administer the program and as well as to provide active enforcement and parking ambassadors within Aggieville from 8 to 5, it's between about $88,000 and $155,000 a year annually. So that's an ongoing staffing expense cost, much more than there is now. And again, we have limited parking enforcement in Aggieville today. So we would increase that enforcement. The technology that we talked about in order to manage paid parking and in order to manage enforcement is a cost of about $1 million. Of that $1 million, about $250,000 to $300,000 is being paid for through the parking garage construction, because that equipment is going to be part of that facility. And those technology costs, again, include the paid parking equipment, both on and off street, the deployment of that mobile application payment system, and the management software that's required to use those systems. In addition, it requires additional technology cost to be deployed to be able to manage those time limits. And that initial cost to procure that equipment is actually less than the additional parking enforcement officers that would be required to cover the same amount of area in the same amount of time. So that capital cost actually reduces the ongoing personnel enforcement cost. So we talked about the need to be able to fund these programs because there is an ongoing cost. This program in the long term is about $500,000 a year to operate. So there is cost to do this, but the benefits received really come in the form of customer access and convenience within Aggieville. That operation cost on an annual basis, includes not only the maintenance and operations of the parking garage, but the operations and maintenance of the parking enforcement program. That results in about 54 cents per hour per space. So that's over the 900 spaces or so that would be in Aggieville. Now that's the floor of the cost, because that's just the break-even cost. That doesn't address the fact that adjacency to the university is about $1.50 an hour. So if you can provide, or do choose to provide, a lower cost per hour to park in Aggieville, you're quickly going to find that short-term parkers at the university are going to choose the lower cost option of parking in Aggieville. So our recommendation would be to consider what the cost should be to help manage the overall parking between Aggieville and the university. Again, discussions to be had ongoing in the coming year, not necessarily action requested today. Two primary ways to be able to pay for that cost. One is through the general fund, where property taxes citywide are used to pay those costs. So anyone that's paying city property taxes would incur the burden of a parking management program within Aggieville. Even those who do not frequent Aggieville would be subject to paying for those ongoing costs. Another option is a parking assessment to the business owners and the property owners in Aggieville to pay for that and subsidize it. It could be a one-time or ongoing parking assessment, or it could be paid by leveraging the business improvement district taxes. In this case, again, the property owners within Aggieville pay all those costs and their burdens to those costs to manage that area in town. The third is user-based fees. User-based fees are fees that are paid for by the user of those services. So if you park in Aggieville, you're using a service of the city that is not a required service like water or power, but in a similar fashion, the more water you use, the more water you pay for, the more power you use, the more power you pay for. So it's a user-based approach. This user-based approach is also consistent with that intended to be deployed at the airport, whereas the costs for parking at the airport are intended to support the parking improvements that are underway today and pay the debt service and bond obligations on those. If you choose not to park in Aggieville because you don't come to Aggieville, you would not be subject to those costs. So a number of strategies to think about and consider moving forward. It's not to say that one of the three must be used, but it can be a combination of strategies that are available to help pay for those ongoing costs. A couple of additional considerations, and we're almost done, so we can go back to questions and discussions. Communication, 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 communication. I can't stress how important that is. Rolling out new policies and procedures without communicating to the Aggieville businesses, the business association, the residents, the employees, and the visitors of Aggieville is absolutely critical so they understand why it's important and what the benefit is that they're receiving from these changes. Use the channel, the communication channels that you have available, your Twitter, your website, your LinkedIn, your Facebook, to send out these messages in a lot of different ways so everybody has the opportunity to hear it and hear it repeatedly. Those educational campaigns are critical for success of the program. And again, we talked about, as you move into this transitional approach where you go from, as is today, the operational strategy today, into phase one, educate through warnings. Don't immediately start writing tickets on day one. Talk to the parkers, provide flyers on their cars and their windshields about the changes that are in place. Absolutely provide enforcement and penalties to those that are habitually not following the procedures and protocols. The parking enforcement officers will quickly realize that the red Chevy pickup that's parked at the corner of 12th and Morrow every day, all day, has probably received a number of educational sessions. So move into penalization of those people first, but education is absolutely critical. There's going to be policies and ordinances that are going to have to be updated within the city code. I'm just listing a couple of sections here that we've identified. The report has some draft wording. City staff and legal are going to have to take the time to identify those sections, provide the draft wording, as well as bring it back to commission for the approval process. That will take time, but in order to make these changes, there's going to have to be some policy and ordinance changes put in place as well in order to be able to enforce those. There's going to be signage requirements that Public Works is going to have to put up as well because there's going to be new signs. An additional opportunity, I believe, that can help support good parking and traffic management in Aggieville, for that matter, is to provide TNC pickup zones. Now, TNCs, you'll remember we've talked about a couple of times, are transportation network companies. It's a generic term to basically say Uber and Lyft. In other cities, there's some additional private operators that do this. The idea of this and the benefit to Aggieville is to reduce the number of vehicles driving through the core, thus reducing traffic congestion on those main roads. The city would set up identified pickup zones on the periphery of Aggieville, in which if you choose to use an Uber or Lyft to get to Aggieville for whatever reason, and Mayor Reddy to support the strategy of making good choices and reducing drunk driving, you can pull up your app and it'll tell you where you can get picked up at. So you can have the queuing for your Ubers and Lyft in one area and not have them driving all over the streets looking for the person they're trying to pick up. It also gives the rider the opportunity to pick where they're going to get picked up at. Again, we would suggest multiple locations on the periphery of Aggieville. The picture up here in the top middle is actually an example of that. This is Disney Springs in Orlando. It shows you where the person is as the blue dot, and it shows where the pickup location is. So it literally provides you that breadcrumb trail to get to that location. It also prohibits Uber and Lyft drivers from picking up at undesignated locations. So if I'm standing in the middle of Aggieville, there's no way that those drivers can pick me up. It won't let you initiate the ride. So that requires cooperation with the city, contractually obligating with these companies to set these programs up. But they work quite well. And I think Aggieville would certainly benefit from that. Not only to support good behavior choices and reduce drunk driving, but largely to also reduce traffic congestion and the vehicles driving up and down the road that don't need to be there. Creates a better environment for Aggieville in a whole. So that's what I have to share on the strategies. Again, phase one strategy being over the next 12 to 18 months during the completion of construction, and then moving into phase two, which is a longer term, more permanent parking management strategy to support parking and equity for all users, as well as to encourage the opportunity for successful economic development.
Are you done? Sorry.
Yes, ma'am, I'm done. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Hattersahl.
Commissioner Hassel, so I know there was some concern by the places, sandwich shops or coffee joints that people are gonna have to pay $3 to $5 to park to go in and buy a $3 to $5 cup of coffee and stuff. Is there some way to provide 10 minutes of free parking, or first 15 minutes is free or something to allay the concerns of those businesses? Yeah, if you're gonna, is there any provision for that?
Yes, absolutely, Commissioner Hatzel, it's a good question. There's a number of strategies to be able to do that, and I think that's why Mr. Hilgers talked about this will be an ongoing discussion here for the next year or so to find the optimum strategy for Aggieville. The idea of being able to provide the first hour free, or the first 15 minutes free, or the first half an hour free, absolutely is an opportunity and a strategy. It's done throughout the country. In fact, if you open the full report, it shows some specific examples of where that's done and what those strategies look like. The trade-off in that, I will say, is that your cost of recovery to pay for the operation and maintenance of the system would likely increase. But there absolutely are good strategies to be able to do that. Our suggestion is, if you want to find a good balance to that, is have the off-street parking, the parking garage and the two parking lots be the locations where there is what we call a grace period or a free period of parking, in order to make sure that those on-street spaces are turning over more frequently.
So just limit it to the on-street parking would always stay the same, but if you're gonna, okay, if you park in the garage, then you got 15 minutes or half an hour to go run your stuff before you get charged anything.
Yeah, and similarly, the airport is planning on implementing a similar approach, whereas if you intend to drive to the airport to drop someone off, or you're waiting for a flight to come in to pick someone up, there would be a grace period, again, that free period, in which you would not be subject to parking fees. And that helps a lot in being able to sway the concerns of, what about that $3 cup of coffee? If it costs me $1.50 in addition, it becomes a real expensive cup of coffee. So we don't want to be able to push those people out of Aggieville as well.
So if it costs 54 cents per hour per spot overhead minimum, I'm sure there's been some discussion as to what kind of rates we think we need to charge per hour. Where are we at, Jason?
And I'll just reiterate, we've kicked around a lot of options, and we're going to bring a lot of options for you all to consider. When we talked about the airport, we had three. There was a $3 option, a $4 option, and a $5 option, and we're still wrestling around with that. This garage is going to be much more complicated because we're going to have a lot of interested groups in parking in this garage. And the interest is going to vary by day. You're going to have a lot of different groups of people with interest at K-State, with interest in the district, with interest at an event, possibly even football games. We've learned a lot from Lincoln. They actually sell every stall in their parking garages on game day for the entire day. That's a strategy. There are a lot of strategies we can maximize this garage and this location for our community. We have businesses that we know want spaces within this garage, and we anticipate more. We also want the employees to park here during the day. Their rates more than likely are going to be less than the rates in which we're charging the corporate entity for the convenience of the stalls that we're providing. So multiple strategies on how we address this. Times of the day, you see it in Lincoln too. 8 to 5 Monday through Friday is one rate. Evenings and weekends is a different rate because the supply and the demand are much different in the Haymarket on the evenings and weekends. So we're going to have to work through a lot of different scenarios and get feedback. And we have the ability with this electronic app to structure this in a way that maximizes revenue, but actually may be the most convenient to the customer.
Well, yeah, obviously, when all this talk of saving money and cutting costs and out of the general fund and such like that, the idea of $1 million of capital investment for the technology when we need $2 million for the finance department's new software, that becomes, there has to be a better way, it has to be a way to pay for that outside of, and obviously the user fees I think is the only logical, because I can't imagine getting the Aggieville people to agree on a business improvement district assessment because of their varied interests and inability to agree on anything. So, I would think the user fees is going to be the way to go, and I hate the $1 million upfront thing, but if we think that we can cash flow the parking without it being exorbitant, then, and if it solves the problem, which will probably create different problems because every solution in Aggieville creates a new problem, I think we could if we can get going, and then we'll obviously realize, oops, that's not going to work, and then we'll tweak it, and then that'll help for a while, and then we'll have to tweak it like every other problem. But
the good thing about the GMP for the parking garage, it includes that $1 million.
So, okay, so that's
to
not
turn
in
the
addition
key.
to the other.
Correct. So that GMP will have everything to operate that garage in an efficient manner.
He was saying there's 300-some thousand in the garage, but there's still extra.
Yes, we'll have to come up with additional to manage the entire district.
Okay.
But the parking garage and its GMP, I don't know if you validated that today, Andrew, but yeah, we're good. That amount that we'll be able to debt service and use tax increment finance dollars for will be included in that GMP.
All right, well,
Yeah, so to clarify, out of that $1 million, about $300,000 of it is allocated towards the parking garage, and the GMP in the parking garage The additional monies is to be able to manage the on-street parking within Aggieville and the other 2 parking lots.
Linda Morse. I remember that the airport parking lot and the fees collected there is supposed to pay for that parking lot. So I also have that expectation about the Aggieville garage, and that the fees that are collected in the district or wherever are going to pay for those, rather than burdening the entire city with all of the specialization that we're really doing. So is that what you're planning, Jason, still? Are we still on track with that?
Yes, and our strategies that we'll be bringing forward over the next year, year and a half will absolutely address that.
Okay.
We're in a bit of an advantage being next to K-State, who charges everybody to park.
Yeah.
That we can create an environment that also will generate revenue. Now, it probably won't be the same approach as K-State, but we'll at least acknowledge what they're doing and what somebody could leverage the parking garage for and use K-State. That may be, I mean, there are a lot of people that park on 14th and in our park that walk to K-State. There are a lot of people that buy a parking garage pass at K-State that may end up looking at our garage as an alternative. So there are different ways we can approach this, but yes, our intent here is to look at strategies to pay for the operation of parking management at the garage with these rates.
And I'm really want to have you exercise caution as you make decisions about giving away parking spaces in the parking garage, because that's going to affect the bottom line. I wondered, what department is this parking system going to report to in City Hall? Or
It's a good question, Commissioner, and I'll back up just a second. I don't plan on giving away any stalls in the parking
Okay,
garage.
good.
So just want to clarify that.
I just want to, don't do that.
But second, parking in Manhattan so far, we have a couple parking enforcement officers that reside in municipal court. City staff met prior to COVID, probably around the first of the year, and we all acknowledged in order to do this right, we got to look to some models from other communities, and they have their own departments, and they're well-staffed and they're well-ran. We're getting to the point now with the second parking garage coming online, the desire to start parking charging to park downtown, the airport starting to charge. We're getting to the point we need to manage this appropriately and not piecemeal. We have Park and Rec helping with maintenance. We have municipal court helping with enforcement. We have city manager's office helping with administration. It needs its own set of individuals dedicated to it. And that factors into the cost that Andrew has presented along with the revenues. So yes, whether that's in the city manager's office, we've debated between Public Works, Fire, and Park and Rec. They all seem to like the city manager's office to be the location, so that might just be where it lands. We'll see.
I wondered about the possibility of the fines that are, the tickets that are written in the fines going toward parking rather than just wherever they go through municipal court. I mean, that would be another avenue to think of. I just, under no circumstances would I want the general fund to sourcing the parking needs of the community. To me, this is an amenity and not as something that's absolutely essential like some of the other things we use for the general fund. I did have the airport recommendations to the airport board the other day mentioned the first hour free, or the first half hour. People going out to pick someone up and not staying, but the plane's late, or they have to get their luggages lost, or whatever the story is. Does the software have the ability to treat the airport different than the parking garage different than the downtown? Okay, it does.
It does, and Commissioner Morris, you can have different rules for the parking garage as the parking lots as the on-street parking spaces. And so the beauty of a system like this is, while the user experience is the same from an equipment perspective and how we use it to conduct our transaction, the policies, going back to what Commissioner Hatsall had a question about, was that you can set those time limits or grace periods differently from the airport. So you may choose it to be the first 2 hours free, you may choose it to be the first 20 minutes free. And in different times of day, in different seasons, in different days of the week, you can have varying different schedules. So there's a lot of flexibility in what that looks like. And I think that's part of what Commission still needs to understand. It's yet to be analyzed because we're looking at the overall parking management strategy today, but we absolutely need to get into the weeds and analyze at a little bit more detailed level what the right balance is between those different strategies when it comes to free versus paid and when and how much.
Jason, I also wondered if the city IT people have the ability to support a sophisticated software system like this, or if this will be supported by the company that we buy, or we use their equipment as the software, and then we pay them to support the software. I mean, we're talking about making these fancy changes already, and we haven't got it.
Sure, every piece of software that entails taking payment has to obviously make its way into our financial reporting system. So IT, finance are all involved every time we look at new software, and to make sure it does pair with our existing system.
No, I'm talking about who's going to maintain the computer system and implement the changes. I
Yeah.
know you're going to get the money.
Sure.
I guarantee that.
Sure. No, the relationship between the parking management, whether that's a department or a division, those individuals will have a command over how to adjust and work with that company if things do need tweaked. Yep.
So it'll be corporate support, like
Yep.
like Civic Plus does for
Yep.
their software. That's what I wanted.
Yeah, just about every department's got their own relationships with their software companies,
Yeah.
as well as our IT staff.
Okay. And I think those are most of my questions, other than we don't have sales tax left over, but we do have some special alcohol sales tax money. If there were ever any way, this would be a kind of a trade-off to support, to use to support Aggieville that pays a lot of that sales tax. Thanks.
I just want to ask a question to clarify, because I think the original question, I think that Commissioner Morris mentioned, but I don't always hear well, was the parking management plan going to pay for the garage?
It's intended to.
It's
Not
gonna
not for
actually-
the construction, but for the operations annually.
Okay, and that's what I wanted to clarify,
Yeah.
because people out there may not have understood the distinction, that the parking management plan is going to pay for the operation, but it is not going to cover the cost of that garage.
Right.
That's two separate issues, exactly, so just wanted to be sure we all heard that correctly. My comments on this are, I think this has got to be user fee based. I mean, that's the route that I've always taken on that. And I think we do need to build in the flexibility, as was mentioned, where you got some free time. You know, maybe it's 30 minutes at the airport, you know, maybe it's 15 minutes in Aggieville. That's got to be built into the software, and I think that's the main direction I'm interested in. And I think you do have to have a parking management plan, and you've got to have it staffed. I'm not sure I'm sold on the ambassador idea, but, you know, you need some enforcement people out there and somebody that can manage it.
Commissioner Estabrook.
Yeah, this is Aaron Estabrook. Question for you, just to clarify pages in our packet here. I was flipping through the cost recovery through user base fees on page 39. talks about 461 per space, but that's, or potentially 507 per space. That's all broken down based on what we were just talking about in meeting the goal of paying for the management plan, essentially.
Yeah, so Commissioner Estabrook, that, I'll go back to that slide unless we want to pull it up in the report. I think this summarizes that cost recovery. That top line, that approximately $500,000, it's a little bit less. The actual hard number is in the report there that you're referencing. That 54 cents per hour per space
Right.
is what that break-even cost is to operate the parking management strategy and to operate the garage. Now that 54 cents per hour per space is based off of the 900 or so
Capacity
parking
being
spaces
used,
that will be
yeah.
in the system in Aggieville after the garage is completed.
I think I understand that. The part that somewhat confused me was page 40, where you're throwing out the $721 number under general fund versus user-based fees. And I just want to clarify, I guess, just a little bit of the increase there is not necessarily based on, what is that based on? The 700 number?
Are you referring at the bottom of the page?
Yeah, that paragraph. So it's talking about paid permits to exempt time limits, and then goes down to 721 at
Third
100%
sentence.
capacity.
Okay, so there's, Commissioner Estabrook, there's two different numbers that you're referring to there. One is the $721 and one is the $1,802. The difference is that with the $721, it assumes that it is a 100% user-based fee, meaning that only the parkers within Aggieville would be paying to support that. The number goes up when we're using the general fund because there would be parking permits that would still be paid for by parkers that are not paying an hourly rate that buy a permit. So parkers that would be exempt from the time limits would be paying those fees as well.
Okay.
So it changes the math on how the number of people parking in Aggieville, as well as the blend of what we call transient parkers, people that are there for a shorter duration of stay, versus monthly parkers, people that have contracts with the city and pay a monthly flat rate regardless of the access.
But the total here, the backwards math on that, I guess, is backing up from the total management plan to fund it in whole, or?
It is, yes. The
Okay, so
approximately $500,000.
Never would we get above that in any of the scenarios that are being offered, right? Just to, in a world where if there was anything above that, it could go towards streetscape or other things that we're incentivizing about parking. None of the math in here gets you there. This is just breaking even.
Correct, that's a break even. So if you were able to generate a revenue in excess of approximately $500,000 a year, or approximately 54 cents per space per year, then there would be additional monies that could be available to put into a long-term capital sinking fund for long-term maintenance, or other revenue expenditures that are at the desire of commission. Now, I will say, depending on the organizational structure of the parking system, you may not be able to share those monies. If it's set up as a parking enterprise versus a parking department, all of the monies that are generated would have to stay within that parking enterprise and could not be used for other city services that are not related to that enterprise. If it's a parking department, again, just how it's organizationally structured, those funds in excess could be used for other things, as well as put away for long-term capital maintenance.
So I guess I will run through a couple things. My thinking here is this is we haven't been using it or treating it in the sense of we would with utility, for example, that there's a user fee associated with it. And I think that lines me up with the three other commissioners so far that have spoke about using user fees. So I won't belabor that. I think that's important that we are trying to not use the general fund to reach that break-even mark with the user fees. But it also opens the door to, broader conversations about reframing what Aggieville is in the parking and encouraging walking, encouraging all of the things you mentioned. So I think there's a lot of tangential positives that come out of that long-term parking plan. Back to Commissioner Hattasall's point, I think along the technology, for us, obviously we don't need to get hung up. I can see with the technical details, but the technology overcomes a lot of barriers that we've had in the past when it comes to that static meter that you have, where you can have dynamic parking and assessment and based on congestion hours or game day hours and apps, like you mentioned before. I think that removes a lot of the older thinking around putting this in there. So the investment on the technology makes sense as long as it's flexible and as long as there's applicable use to not make people pay to work in Aggieville as well. That employee permitting and how that would go down is pretty important. We don't want to discourage or subsidize somebody's wage to be able to work in Aggieville.
So I have a few questions for you. I think several of the items that were already brought up by the other commissioners apply to me as well. But I wanted to know a little bit more about this license plate. What is it? LPR?
License plate recognition technology?
Yes. Tell me a little bit more about that. The reason I ask is this. Several students may have a car from their parents, or they may be sharing a friend's car. What exactly does that mean? Because you don't want the wrong person to get the citation, or is that used specifically when you're paying and you type in your license plate number? So I just need a little bit more clarification about that.
Sure, good question, Mayor Reddy. License plate reader technology is used to create a digital permit, so to speak. It also is used to reduce the person hours and labor to do enforced parking. Currently, parking enforcement is done with chalk and wiping the chalk stick on the tire. Think of this technology as wiping that chalk stick on a tire, but with a camera attached to a car that's moving, and moving at a speed faster than a person can walk. The idea is you can cover more ground in less time. What happens is when I'm driving down the road, I'm the parking enforcement officer, I'm driving down the road chalking all these tires really fast. Okay, so I've got 2 chalk sticks just out the door. And I've gone all the way down the road and I turn the block and I'm chalking all the tires again. What's happening when that technology is chalking the tires, it's grabbing a license plate capture. And the software, in its algorithms, recognizes that the license plate is ABC123 and that I am geolocated at this location on Morrow. After the entire district has been run with the vehicle, parking enforcement comes back again. And what's happening this time is the parking enforcement officer, in this case the camera, is looking out the window saying, chalked. Okay, so it's now 1 hour later, so you've been here for 1 hour. It grabs the picture, it records license plate ABC123, and it says that vehicle is in the same spot. When it comes around in the 3rd hour, during phase 1, it's gonna say, aha, license plate ABC123 has been here for 3 hours. Time to issue a citation. Then the citation is issued. That citation goes with the vehicle, not with the driver. So if you borrow my car and park it for longer than 3 hours, I'm getting a ticket. That social responsibility of trading the cost is separate from the parking enforcement program. But the idea is that it captures those license plates digitally and virtually and in space and time to be able to more efficiently enforce. Now, there's always questions about privacy issue with license plate reading technology. The parking program would want to set up a policy for removing data and not storing data. The city may very well have a policy now on data storage. Those same policies could apply. But again, it's not a breach of privacy. It's in the public domain. It's no different than me walking out there this evening and writing down all the license plate numbers that are there, taking a picture with my phone. It's not intended to be a breach of privacy. Its intention is to increase enforcement and efficiency, thus reducing the overall cost. The benefit, so that's the benefit to the city in terms of enforcing the time limits and the restrictions. The consumer has a different benefit, and the consumer's benefit is that when I go to park, I go and park and put in my license plate number and associate my length of stay for parking for whatever that duration is with my license plate. Older strategies used to be that you would have to go to the machine and pay for your parking and print your receipt out and put it on the dashboard. So I can skip a step as a consumer and move straight to just walking down the street, paying for my parking on my mobile application with my friends or family or colleagues, and go on to the business of spending my time in Aggieville. So it reduces the number of steps and the burden that's required from the consumer.
Okay. Tell me a little bit more about the app. You mentioned Kansas State University is doing an app, and it would be good for us to collaborate with them. What does that entail? Are we thinking about an MOU, or are we thinking separate from them but something similar to them so that we are speaking the same language?
Sure. So Kansas State University just rolled out the app, and the company's called Park Mobile. It's one of the different vendors on the market. Again, think of it as the Ford, the Chevy, or the Cadillac. Pick your pleasure on which brand you choose. Each vendor option is a little bit different. You might like the Ford a little bit than the Cadillac, or the Cadillac more than the Chevy. It's consumer preference. The idea is consistency across the region and across different business lines. So the city and the university are clearly different entities, but the consumer, which is the parker, likes to have a consistent experience. Every time you go to the coffee shop, you go to that coffee shop because you like that consistent experience in the way your coffee tastes. This is similar. You would essentially set up your own program with the company that you chose to move forward with. There's no MOU required. There's little to no capital required for the mobile app companies. One of the nice things about those companies is that they do the branding and the signage and wayfinding in order to utilize their platform. And you don't pay an ongoing fee to those companies. The user pays the fees. So think of it like Ticketmaster. When you go to buy your tickets for the game, you pay a user convenience fee. The user pays the user convenience fee typically. In some cases, the governmental agency or the university or the hospital, whoever is using that program, may roll that into the rates. What happens when you do that is those user convenience fees are paid by you, the city, in this case, thus reducing the net revenue that you would realize from those parking transactions. It's most common that the convenience fee, so to speak, is paid for by the user. From a user perspective and user experience, you download the app, you sign up with your own account, you link your credit card or credit cards, so maybe you have a personal card, or if you're parking on business, you would have a separate business card for that. You can set up a number of different vehicles on it, so if you drive more than one vehicles or more than one vehicle household, or your son or daughter uses the account, when you go to initiate the transaction, I'd park my car, I'd open the app, I would pick that I'm parking in Aggieville on street. I would select the vehicle that I'm driving today and the payment method I want to use, and select the duration of stay. So let's say I'm going to stay for 1 hour. I pay the hourly rate and hit park. That hour initiates. That information is sent up to that LPR system we talked about and says, license plate ABC 123 is paid for 1 hour. So when it drives by, it says, oh, I see that plate, it's in my system. They're good. So I'm having lunch and we're having a good time, and I say, you know what, why don't we go walk around and shop for a bit? Oh my gosh, I've got 10 minutes left. So I pull up the app again and I extend my parking session by 1 additional hour. It pays for that additional hour because I only get 2 hours maximum, and away we go. We never have to walk back to the car. We don't have to worry about moving the car. We can just go about our business in Aggieville and enjoying ourselves. So from a user convenience experience, it has a lot of benefits. It also has the benefit of being contactless. I don't have to touch any equipment that's outside or that someone else has touched before me. I don't have to worry about pulling my credit card out or pulling out that pocket full of quarters that I mentioned either to feed the meter to pay for a parking session.
So that's convenient as an app, and I think that's one of the things we really need to do. But that brings me back to the license plate thing, so how would that person who's going to cite them know? Did you already mention that?
So with the app, Commissioner Reddy, what happens is once I initiate that parking session, it knows that my vehicle is license plate ABC 123. It sends that information to the LPR system and says, this vehicle is paid until such and such a time. Every time you go by, until they've stayed for too long, they're good and they've paid. So
So
those
it's
systems
linked.
talk to each other.
All right, that's one of the clarifications.
If,
Because I
if
don't,
you've never paid and you never registered, then they're gonna issue the citation and place it on your windshield, I would assume, Andrew. I mean, if they're not in the system at all,
Correct.
they're gonna issue that ticket. Whoever's driving is gonna see the ticket on their windshield, just like is done
Right.
today, Mayor. So regardless of who owns the car, the person driving it will be responsible for the ticket that was placed on their windshield.
yeah, that was the first question. The second one was if they use the app and decide to extend their time, how would the parking citation person know that they've now extended it to 6 hours or something? So that, but you're saying
And that software talks
they
to
can
each other
link
to
to
know.
each other.
And if you
That's-
use the app to pay, Mayor, and you stay beyond that paid time, that software will tell you when they go by, issue the ticket, and then they would put the citation on the windshield as you would if you paid at the parking meter, as
That's what he was saying.
Mr.
Okay.
Hilgers described.
That makes sense. So in Aggieville, I've never known anything to get done even in 5 or 10 minutes. Even when you go to get a sandwich, you're typically sitting there and eating, or you're waiting for it to. So I'm not sure how it would be just for 15 or 10, 15 minutes of free time. That's something I suppose we can do, but most people end up staying there for a variety, for a much longer time. And you already said if we have events or parades or K-State things going on, we have flexibility on how we want to do that. The schedule, payment schedule or parking during that time, which is good. The other, you explained the license plate and the app. I do think the app is the right way to go. I know the kiosks, sometimes they don't work very well. I'm not familiar with the app, but I know my kids use apps for every single thing right now. So I would think that would be easier to use, especially since K-State is already doing that, for us to look into that a little bit closer. In my experience, being on the city commission, nothing totally ever paid for itself. So I would assume a little bit of it might come out to the general fund, but our goal should be to have as much revenue to pay for this on its own. Jason, can you remind me once again how much we see getting from the TIF district to pay for the garage? Is it $12 million? Okay, so that would go right to the garage, not to the landscaping or anything else?
It's 12 million in principal. We anticipate total revenue streams coming in between 17 and 20 million to offset the 12 million principal and bonds.
Okay.
But yes, it'll go right into the bond and interest to help debt service the garage.
I'm in favor of Phase 1, as you mentioned, with the 3-hour limits and the plan that you proposed here for the restrictions and the modifications. And the payment program that you've discussed has been already mentioned, such that I want as little as possible from the general fund to be utilized for this. I do think it needs to be completely user-based fees, and go through some iterations of that, so we figure out which events or how does it work on weekdays, weekend evenings. Sometimes those areas are more busy than others, and how do we go through that? I'm not sure how I feel about the ambassador piece. I understand they're going to be the implementers and the educators for this process. So that's one piece I would like to have further discussions about. Would it be, are we talking about hourly workers or K-State students? Are we talking about anybody that needs to be trained along with PD to do this? What does that look like?
They would be our employees.
Okay.
So instead of just the person who writes the ticket, they would also be the person that greets people, informs them of what's going on, how things work, working with the residents, working with the tenants, the businesses, but also is a primary responsibility of issuing those tickets.
So right now, the one who issues the tickets works from PD, I believe, right?
Works
No,
for
it's
us.
ours? For some city. Okay, I didn't
Yep.
realize that.
Yep,
You probably told me that a few times, I just forgot.
it's all right.
Okay. Commissioner Morris had mentioned this would be under city. And at some point, we may need to visit what a department looks like for that. I don't know.
Yeah, and like I mentioned, all the fingers keep getting pointed back towards our office to manage this, so that's probably where it'll land.
This is our first paid garage, right? In the city?
Yeah, so we're set up to charge downtown. We just never dropped the arms and started charging people. So we'll be coming back with a recommendation on that as well.
So if we were to, I mean, for the user fees, is the airport going to be doing that before us, or is that on the same track? I'm thinking the airport is on track to do it earlier than we are.
We will be in front of you looking for your concurrence to start charging at the parking for the airport before we're done with the garage.
Because I would like to see how that works out too, and where we
Yep.
need to tweak it as we move forward. Like I said, as long as we are using the user-based fees and however much you all discuss, whether it's $3, $5, $10, whatever it is, the annual ones, those are going to constantly keep changing. But one key point you made is that K-State charges for everything. And I think that's where we are at right now. This is an expensive garage, but we also want Aggieville's business to be successful. And this is to take care of some of the parking limitations so they can have more events and more activities going there without having to worry about parking. And if anybody chooses to Uber or anything else, if you speak about it on relative terms, typically your parking fees may be less than taking Uber from one place to another, unless you're sharing that cost with each other, however that might be. I don't know if you need more information from us for the next sessions.
No, I think we're good. I think we got enough feedback tonight. We'll be bringing back those proposed ordinance changes so we can implement those come December. But appreciate the feedback tonight. It was very helpful.
Okay, Commissioner Hattisell?
Yeah, one last question for Jason, probably. Currently, if somebody has to buy a parking permit for their neighborhood, blue, green, red, whatever, the city charges a little bit for that, for their time and energy. So all of these parking permits for around Aggieville and businesses, but it's only $5? Okay, so it's not something that's gonna,
Yeah, if you live there and you're basically just buying a permit to park out in front of your home, so you're not ticketed when the influx of all these cars comes in the morning, it's a modest charge of $5
A year?
for a semester, I believe. You got to bring in your lease, just prove you live there. Then you can get that sticker to put in your car. PD enforces that. That's not us. That is RCPD. So they get into those neighborhoods early in the semester, kind of set the tone, and then it usually flows pretty well.
and the $5 is for the cost of the sticker and the 5 minutes of the staff person's time to,
Correct. And it just gives it that legitimacy to come in and get it. that green zone, I think, goes all the way to 9th Street. So everything from North Manhattan east to 9th, north of Bluemont, has its own color zone in itself. These color zones around Aggieville can help give that tenant the right to park in front of their unit and not be squeezed out by people trying to get a little bit further away so they can walk in for free.
Okay.
Linda Morse again. Just to speak to the need for good public relations and this ambassador position. I have really noticed the difference in the public face of the city since we have added certainly 1 or 2 or 3, I don't know, public information officers, and their ability to translate the acronyms, just into more public-friendly language. And this parking system that we're talking about, whether it's the airport or downtown or Aggieville, needs that kind of attention. So it's not an entry-level position, as far as I'm concerned. This takes someone who is knowledgeable about the system. And I don't think you come up to speed on that in with 2 weeks, 2 weeks after you start here. I think it's important to emphasize that they're going to be a jack of all trades. They're going to be talking to business owners, talking to Aggieville Business District, talking to customers and giving tickets. This is going to be a conflicted person. But I believe that this is a critical position for this program that we're constructing and establishing here. So I don't want to dismiss it or in any way, whether it's would not want it to be the first position cut during, with a lack of funding or something, especially building it, and not the lowest possible level of employee either. It's going to take a little bit more sophistication than that.
I just had one last question. Tell me a little bit about, there's 51,000 allotted for utilities. What kind of utilities are we talking about?
Assume electricity.
Electricity is what I'm thinking, for the software and such, or lighting?
All the
and
lighting and, yep,
cameras?
Yep.
Will it have cameras? I think we discussed that, cameras. and
security.
all
Yep.
electronics. So that's 51,000 per year is what you're saying.
And probably general maintenance as well. So there's usually some line items in addition to utilities that cover us just taking care of facilities, whether that's power washing and cleaning. But yeah, I
Maintenance.
think the majority of that is electricity.
Yeah, the highest cost of operating a parking structure outside of staffing and payroll is the power required to keep the lights on.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Oh, excuse me, Commissioner Morris, I said one of the highest costs of operating a parking structure after payroll and benefits, which is staffing costs, is keeping the lights on.
Keeping the lights on, which is important. We want that on. Thank you. Okay, sounds good. Well, thank you for presenting this evening. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Commissioners.
The last item on the agenda is discuss provision of establishing a local emergency declaration under the city's home rule authority. Is Ron going to be speaking to this, or Katie? Okay. Like a UFO there.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me, Commissioners?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Thank you. City Manager Ron Fear, good evening. Last week at your briefing session, there was discussion about the aspects of the city providing for its own emergency declaration. And so as a result of that, those declarations can be made under our home rule authority. And they're intended to try and identify reasoning behind some potential actions that you might want to take to adjust some of your policies or ordinances or other factors. And you might be able to do some of those actions without the declaration, but the declaration is really to set out the intent and reasoning. And usually you do those for a temporary period of time, as opposed to making a permanent change to an ordinance or some other existing rules and regulations that you might have. So with that, City Attorney Katie Jackson has prepared a draft resolution just to prepare for discussion. And she also has a presentation to share with you. Katie, thank you.
Thanks, Ron. Mayor and Commissioners, I hope you can hear me okay.
You're good.
Okay, and then I'm gonna pull up it's a brief PowerPoint. Ron asked me just to provide some background as some framework. Let's see, are you seeing the PowerPoint okay?
Yes, we are.
Okay, just as a brief background, you've heard this before, but in the state of Kansas, the state law empowers the state government and counties to react to disasters and emergencies. The statutes provide for the governor to designate city disaster agencies. The process to do that depends upon the resources of the city and the region. We reached out to the league, and Andover, Kansas is the only city that says it has this designation. However, neither the governor nor KDEM have a record of Andover having this designation. So although the statute provides for it, it doesn't seem to be something that's proliferated at all throughout Kansas. But cities have the authority, as Ron said, to act through their constitutional home rule authority. I have a very short summary of what home rule authority means here. It's more complex than this, but the short summary is that the city can legislate for the protection of the public health, safety, or welfare in areas that are not preempted by federal or state law. The state statutes have a provision that says when the governor has declared an emergency, that our municipal ordinances that relate to emergencies shall be in full force and effect unless they conflict with state law or an adopted disaster plan. Manhattan does not currently have any emergency specific ordinances or resolutions that are triggered from a disaster declaration. So a couple cities have this, where if there is a disaster in effect in the community, certain powers are immediately granted or certain activities are immediately started within the city. We have an effect where we react in response to the specific situation. It's more common for cities to react the way that Manhattan does, which is to adopt specific resolutions and ordinances related to the emergency. As Ron mentioned, tonight we're talking about the background on a city declaration of emergency or disaster. The federal, state, and county governments have declared emergencies or states of disaster. For the city to take that action through its home rule authority, it would be we would adopt a resolution. A majority of the governing body would adopt it. A resolution is effective immediately upon a majority vote, so it would go into effect the evening it's adopted if it was. Unlike the county, the way the statutes empower the county, we don't automatically, as a city, have additional powers. So it doesn't allow us to invoke some additional authority that we didn't previously have. Instead, a city declaration of emergency or disaster is about delegating powers to either specific positions in the city or limiting city procedures and operations or impacting the way the city functions. So it's a little different than what the county or the state declarations do. The disaster declaration is not currently required for the city to make FEMA, KDEM, or other similar claims for reimbursement for expenses. However, some cities have reported that a city disaster declaration has simplified the recovery claims. It's something we certainly can do. The league is suggesting that it's up to cities to decide whether or not to do it. As Ron mentioned, sometimes the city declaration of emergency or disaster is there to support the other actions the city might take in response to disaster. And what I mean by the support, it means it's the city declaring it has its own disaster and is going to take its own steps separate from what the county, the state, or the federal government have done, and that this is the support for those actions. I will note that something that Manhattan did early on was what was our emergency powers resolution. The City Commission adopted the third version of that resolution on August 4th. As you'll recall, it relates to virtual meetings, purchasing power, and some other things. The League provided a draft declaration of emergency and disaster, and part of what the League's draft does is what we have already done with our emergency powers resolution. The League put its draft declaration out about the same day that we adopted ours, so we were in concert with it, but we have done a few of the things that the League recommends to be done through their sample. But that being said, the declaration of the city, if you all decide to pursue one, it can contain other provisions that regulate city operations that can be changed by resolution. This is just an example. One thing that we do at the city is a special event permits. And these are permits for certain activities on city streets, on public property. These are activities in which somebody has to come to the city reviews it, and either permits it or not. By resolution, we could limit or regulate those types of events on city property because it's the use of our own property. And if we wanted to do something with respect to special event permits, we could put that in this resolution. We wouldn't have to do that. We could do that in a separate resolution. We don't have to do it at all. It's just an example of something that we could do by resolution. It's not required that we adopt a city declaration of emergency disaster at this time. And by required, I mean, it is not a requirement for FEMA funding or any of the Sparks funding or anything else. It's not required, but if it is something that we can pursue, if the commission desires to pursue it, it could be adopted prior to any other kind of commission actions that you may be interested in taking, or at the same time. As I've said, a resolution is effective immediately. So if the city commission wanted to pursue any kind of pandemic specific resolutions or ordinances in the future, we could adopt this first to support it. And then we could also adopt it if you feel there's a need to do so to support reimbursement claims, even though it's not considered necessary at this time. Bear in mind that anything in the disaster declaration would have to be provisions or actions that can be taken by resolution. You would still have to adopt ordinances to do the things that require an ordinance. So for example, the mask ordinance, that is not a requirement we could have adopted via a resolution through a disaster declaration resolution. We would have had to adopt a separate ordinance regardless. And that's all I have. Just some background for the commission, and happy to answer any questions with Ron as well.
Katie, Linda Morse. I wondered, I understand that Wichita has adopted something like this in the context of Sedgwick County. What provisions did they invoke, or what is their primary goal by doing that? I've not heard that yet.
This is Katie Jackson, city attorney again. Wichita adopted, and I'd have to look at it specifically. It's been a while since I looked at it, but part of what they did was they did authorize their mayor to take certain actions. They have a different form of government than the city of Manhattan. So their mayor was able to issue some orders as a result of their declaration. And Ron, I don't know if you have any more background on it, and we can certainly get that to you, Commissioner, if you're interested, but.
Yeah, and if you might recall that the draft declaration that the league put out was really meant to cover all the different forms of government. You know, there's the smaller communities have a directly elected mayor. Wichita has a mayor manager form of government where they have a directly elected mayor, but they also have a city manager. So it's kind of one of the things when you gave me additional purchasing power, but certainly if that's it doesn't necessarily, what Wichita did doesn't necessarily apply to what we did because we're a little bit different form of government.
Well, I just wanted to, I was just curious what their purpose was, but I also want to clarify that the mayor cannot act independently in this form of government we have here, and that's what Yusha explained last week. action is required by the commission and not, separate. So just want to be sure everybody understands that, and there's no more confusion, I guess I would call it. But is Wichita the only other city that has done this, or have some others done it? That Wichita did it several weeks ago. Have there been any other cities that have utilized this provision?
I believe there has been. City Manager Ron Fear, I believe Salina did, and I think there's a few others that have done it as well. I don't have a specific listing of those particular entities, but most of them have been associated with the face covering ordinances requirements where their counties have not opted out of the governor's order.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Aaron.
This is Aaron Estabrook. I have a question for Katie Jackson. Katie, can you help me understand are we able to only do something like this if the governor has already declared an emergency?
No, our home rule authority doesn't necessarily limit us to situations in which the governor has already declared an emergency. If there was no declared emergency, the city made the findings that an emergency existed within the city limits, a city could exercise its home rule authority to declare that. It might be hard to do that in the sense that you might not actually have the facts to support it. If the county or the state government haven't also found an emergency, it would be hard to imagine a fact scenario in which a city would identify an emergency that wouldn't also be identified an emergency by a county or a state, but it could be done.
I guess that question is mostly, I think my understanding of the governor's emergency order would expire September 15th if there's not further action on that, and it just muddies the water if we're in a position in late September and there's no order from the county or the governor, but we could potentially do something then, I guess, is what you're saying.
Yes, and I think that concern is a valid concern. I think it's unlikely that the governor's order won't be extended. In order for the communities in Kansas to access the Sparks funding, they have to have declared emergencies, and I assume that many of us will have expenses that arise after the declaration of those emergencies. So I think it's unlikely that it won't continue, but I agree with you, Commissioner. If there's a circumstance in which those lapse and no emergency is declared, it would be prudent for the city of Manhattan to declare one so that we have a consistent declared emergency so we can continue to access any kind of federal or state reimbursements.
Yeah, go ahead.
Would the Sparks and the feds consider our emergency declaration sort of valid if the state and the county didn't think it was a state of emergency? I guess that's my question. Would FEMA go, oh, well, if the city thinks it's an emergency, but the state or the county don't, does the city carry enough clout and gravitas to convince FEMA that there's some kind of an emergency if the state and the county don't?
Yeah, this is Katie Jackson again, Commissioner Hattasol. My response would that to be, we'd have to confirm that for you, but bear in mind that across the 50 states, there are many different structures for emergency management. And so it's quite possible that in some states that the cities are the primary or more responsible for their disaster declarations. So we would have to answer that for you. I think that's a good question, but I'm not sure that, just bear in mind that there's so many different circumstances. I'm not aware that the Sparks funding is limited to circumstances in which your county or your state have also declared emergency. And I don't know if the city manager has heard anything otherwise.
So that's,
This is City Manager Ron Fear. I would just comment that obviously the Sparks funding is federal funds given to the state, and the state is further distributing primarily to the counties to work with their local units of government and others for this process. So, you know, this has definitely been an unusual, the pandemic circumstances of the emergency compared to our normal natural disasters or other disasters, which are typical under the emergency management function, which is in Kansas and in most areas is county-based, all answering to the state. So our plan is a county-wide plan that we participate in. So that's generally the way things are set up, and that's really the way this is envisioning to work as well. There could be situations where you might have a circumstance where, you know, if we were ground zero for an outbreak, so we were impacted first before it spread to the rest of the state, that might be where we might take some action relative to anybody else taking action in that sequence.
Okay. I guess my Commissioner Hattasol again, I guess my real question is what were you guys who voted to bring this thing for discussion envisioning this to do? Because Katie said it doesn't grant us any more powers to do anything, which I was very glad to see, because we've already been proven that we can't be trusted with power because of the mask ordinance, as far as I'm concerned, and a lot of people are concerned. So what I'm not interested in delegating to Ron more authority either as a crisis basis. So I'm curious as to what you guys were wanting to try to accomplish. If it's not going to give us any more power, Katie has made it clear it's not necessary. What is the point from your guys' perspective?
Well, it's not our guys's, but I did talk to Katie and Ron about this earlier, mainly because when we did do the face mask ordinance, you're right, there was no EOC support or Riley County support or anybody's support. And then slowly K-State started to require it on campus. And even to this day, if you ask any of the Riley County commissioners, present commissioners, and candidates that have won their seats or were running at the time, kept saying, I'm glad Manhattan did it, we don't need it in the county. And Julie Gibbs, our local health officer, also had come forward to the Riley County Commissioners and the Board of Health, which is the same thing, and asked for a face mask requirement. And they said, well, the city of Manhattan has it, that's where the population is, we don't need it in the rest of the county. So when the Riley County Health Commission, or Riley County Commissioners make decisions, they're thinking about the entire county. The density of the community of Riley County is in Manhattan. And we are going to have about 20,000 students coming back to campus. We're probably going to have football games on Saturdays. So we are going to have more traffic within the city limits than they will in the county, in the greater county. So they are not under the same pressures as our businesses and our residents and our neighborhoods and our university. All of that traffic is going to be here within the city limits. So they don't have an obligation to the city of Manhattan. We do. So in that instance, I wanted to make sure we have something in place, such as an emergency declaration, a disaster emergency declaration, because I do foresee, like I said, another 20 to 25,000 population, and K-12 is going to open up, so that's about 6,000 students, and I would think more than 60% will probably be in-person classes. We've already seen those rates go up, so I feel there might be a time when we're going to have to make some really big decisions within our own ordinances and within the city that may not impact the entire Riley County, that are going to impact us, because we are not in a rural area.
But I guess my question is Hattasol again. Katie, you said that we don't have to have the declaration to implement any of these ordinances, correct?
It's not necessary to access the FEMA or other funding at this time.
But we didn't need it for the face mask ordinance, and we don't have the
No.
ability to close schools or shut down restaurants and bars either, do we?
Well, so if the city were to start doing more regulation of activities as a result of the pandemic, it would be recommended to declare, especially in those arenas that the counties are are regulating it, like like Riley County is now, it would be prudent to first declare an emergency if you're going to start adopting a framework of different ordinances and resolutions. It would not be necessary, but it would be the support for those actions on a city level.
Okay, well, I'm definitely against Hattasol again. No, I'm definitely against it then, because I don't want us having the ability to limit and constrict business any more than already is being constricted and limited because of the fact that things need to get back to normal far more than they need to have another level of government poking their nose around, thinking we know better than the state and the county about what's going on. And I know you guys are big on, oh, home rule this, home rule that. But the point is that if you three disagree with the county and the state on anything, then you've just crammed another bunch of regulations on people and using the emergency declaration as the excuse to do it. And I'm just not going to be any party to that.
And you know, we've had conversations with Kansas State University leadership as well, as some of the face mask ordinance is a key example. And so this isn't like Lone Rangers doing this. I've spoken with several Board of Education members and their superintendent. So I see this as a public health measure. Never in the 7 years I've been here have I had to discuss home rule as much as I do now. So if I didn't think it was pertinent and important, because I am extremely concerned about our population going up in the next couple of weeks. And I don't think we are prepared.
Mayor, can I weigh in?
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Hattasol's, lumping us all together. It's us versus him or something, and I'd like to weigh in here. The question I think you asked was, why did we have this discussion? Why did 3 votes ask for this discussion? And I don't know why you didn't hear it last time I asked for this, and it's because if the county does fail, and keep in mind, we have a county health officer who is not an elected official, who can recommend and is required to, through the Emergency Management Act, to make recommendations in a pandemic. And if our county commission decides to overrule her, then we may have an emergency that the city can handle. And that, now what we learned today that we didn't know before was, do we even need to do that? And the answer from your point of view is no, and Katie's said that, but there may be things that she's recommending to be done that the city then could potentially do. What I'd like to see is that the Board of Health and the county, what I said last time, do the job of public health and not shirk that burden onto the city, where we have to work with Administrator Julie Gibbs to get this right for the university, for the city, and the county commissioners can look outside the city, but they also are responsible for what's in the city. So I think that was explained last time why I wanted to have this discussion and know more. We have listened. I think we're all quite well aware that you're not for any of this, but I'd like to learn more of the legal things as we go forward. It doesn't mean we have to act on them in the future. Of course, we hear about the mask a lot, education things about the mask. And I mean, you're currently not wearing your mask over your nose like we're supposed to, right? So there you go. We know your position on this, but I'd like to learn more from our legal counsel, and this is why we're doing it.
So I guess my question becomes, so are you guys willing to step in and close the bars in Aggieville and limit the football games and stuff like that too? Because you now have...
If the health officer is recommending that or saying it needs to happen, and she has the authority to do it, but is overruled by the county commission, then you need to step up and listen, I think, and we all do.
I think I will interject here. This doesn't really fall on Julie Gibbs or the health local officer. She's responsible for the entire county. Remember, we did the face mask ordinance even when she was against it. So we need to look at what's in the best interest of the city of Manhattan. What is under our control? Football games are not under our control. We don't have a say in that. So, but we do have a say in other things, whether it's permits or whether it's other areas that we might need to look into. And I think it falls on us to, we're not going to agree on this. My job is not to convince you, but my job is to discuss this up front. During my tenure as mayor this year, I haven't done anything on my own. I've been as transparent as possible. We've had robust dialogue about every single thing that's come up, and that's what this is about. It's about anything we decide here, even in this resolution, will still be a city commission decision. It's not going to be done just by the city manager or the mayor. We won't agree, and we are about as divided as the community as the nation is. But at the same time, I'm telling you, we're having conversations with the university and everybody else, and we're not ready. We're not ready like we need to be. So that's why we are having this discussion.
Mayor, I'd like to speak up. I'm not interested in giving our city manager more authority, and I don't think that that's what we're talking about here, because I think this falls on the city commission.
I agree.
As a whole. But we do need something in place, and the county commission has taken specific action to override or ignore or derail the efforts of the county health director to act in the best interests of the health efforts of the whole county, and that includes Manhattan, always. And so I too see this as a public health issue. I see the county commission consists of politicians who run for office. They have no expertise in health whatsoever, but they are overruling the science part. And it's true that that is a reflection of, as you said, of the division in our country right now between science and politics. And so I will fall on the side of public health. And I don't have anything in mind right now. I just think that we need because of the failure of the county commission, we need to be able to act in the best interests of our citizens. And that's why I feel like we have been elected as city commissioners, is to do what we can. And we have this avenue, a possible avenue, a way we can help our citizens if we need to. And if knowing how long it takes to pass a resolution or pass an ordinance, we have to advertise it, we have to have public hearings, 1 reading, 2 reading, whatever. That takes two weeks practically, or longer. And especially when we have to have the attorney do the research on it. So I feel like we've done our homework, we've been doing our homework. We're in a position to set it up so that if we have to spring into action, we can. And so that seems to me to be very appropriate. And I'm glad that some other cities have already paved the way. They have found their county commissions to be deficient also when it comes to looking after the health of their citizens. And there's no other way you can interpret this. Not taking the health measures that are called for in a pandemic, for crying out loud. So that's where I stand.
Commissioner Hattasol again. The problem is there's a difference of opinion as to what, I'm sure the county commissioners heard from a bunch of people that they didn't think that they needed, just like almost everybody I talk to during the day, whether I'm here at work, at church, walking the streets, it's like almost everybody I talk to thinks masks are stupid and this whole thing is overblown. And the problem is everybody you guys talk to thinks we're not doing enough about it. And so there's the problem, is that a lot of people, 5 deaths over a period of 5 months, more people are dying from suicides and car wrecks than have died from this, and yet they've crashed the economy, their schools all screwed up, they're thinking about canceling football, all this crazy stuff, and there's more people dying from cancer every month than they're dying from this thing, and yet everybody's losing their mind over this, and that's the problem, is that the community does not agree that we need more. A lot of the community thought the county commissioners did the right thing. And all we're gonna do is because we've got 3 votes and they've got votes to go the other way, we're just gonna go back and forth because you guys can make the changes that you don't think are right, whereas a lot of the community thinks they were right to start with. And that's why, and all the 2 weeks for the ordinances is still gonna have to take place. It's not gonna shortcut any of the resolution or ordinance issues, because Katie has said that. We still gotta do all that stuff, so it's not gonna shorten any of that at all either. Finish up, Aaron.
Commissioner Haddisell, I just, and I hear from both sides all the time. I see people, it's on. I see people, and I get feedback. I think we all probably do. I don't feel like I'm in a silo here, but I do try to, one thing I think that we can all do better as commissioners is communicate with the county commissioners. One thing I found out in the last month or so, just having conversations with Commissioner Ford, and is what his perception of where we were was not the same, and also doing saying that we're going to giving them a way out of taking on their responsibility to lead as the Board of Health, and counting on us 3 to pass an ordinance to save them when they behind scenes wanted to do that, when they're behind scenes telling us, you know, that you should support it, an extension. I think that communication needs to be happening more between us and them, rather than this political dialogue. If we want to bridge the divide, we need to talk to the other leaders a little bit more about it. And I don't think we're so far apart, but we're playing political football, and it's not, by the way, we are gonna have football, it sounds like Big 12 is. But that's all I got.
Go ahead, Lynn.
I'll just make one comment. You know, you're trying to say that, you know, the city commission's given Riley County political cover. If they wanted to dictate that the city wears masks, they could do it. Just like they can determine what stores stay open, whatever. So it's not a case of we have to protect the Riley County Commission from themselves.
We don't.
If they wanted us to put on masks and they wanted to do it, they could simply do it. They could say, oh, the city of Riley doesn't have to wear masks. City of Manhattan does have to wear masks because we're pandemic central. Now, my whole thought on this is very simple. I don't want to see the government grow any bigger. That's always been one of the premises. And this kind of thing here just causes it to grow bigger. The other thing is the virus is like a process, and I've always been into business practices. In order to fix a process, you have to fully understand it, which we do not. And whenever business tries to fix a process without fully understanding it, they result in tampering. And what does tampering do? It makes things worse. And that's the road we're on, so I have no use for this at all, whatsoever.
I think we're just going to disagree on this, but I will say, I am not against the Riley County Commissioners. That is, I rarely talk about them. We are elected for the city of Manhattan. This isn't anti-anybody. However, the governor did put out certain mandates for the state, whether it's with the face mask mandate or with the school starting after Labor Day. 105 counties made 105 different decisions. All the school districts made their own decisions. All the cities are making their own decisions. So the breakdown happened at every single level. So this isn't us against them. This is for the city of Manhattan. That's who I represent. That's it. As far as the conversations, I do have lots of conversations with Fort Riley, with Kansas State University, and including some of the Riley County Commissioners that are also part of those groups. So our voices are heard. This isn't anti-somebody else. This is what is in the best interest for the city of Manhattan. That's our duty, and that's what I'm looking at. And this will help in the long run. This pandemic is not over. I am extremely worried, as I've mentioned several times, and we just have a difference of opinion. Any decision we make will always be up front in public. We get the same types of emails. Nobody we all get negative and positive emails on a variety of things. And some of us might be more select, some of us might get a few more than others. But nevertheless, it's a very public, open meeting. I do want to have a resolution in place, and hopefully we can have something next week to review. But I do want it to make it say, it didn't say anywhere here that the city manager dictates anything or the mayor, but I also didn't see anything about a city commission. Is there anything in here that needs to be worked so that it doesn't fall on just one individual and it falls, at the bottom it says the governing body? Is that the way it is, Katie and Ron?
If the commission wanted to declare an emergency soon, as in maybe at the next meeting, or because we have our separate emergency powers resolution that we adopted on August 4th, we'd probably limit this resolution just to the declaration of an emergency. So to answer your question, Mayor, we would not assign any kind of authority. We wouldn't need to do that.
Okay.
We would declare the emergency to a certain date. So that's what we would do, unless you all were ready to do something else in terms of, I don't know, some other type of measure that you could do by resolution, but we wouldn't have to include that. We've already addressed the powers that we would like to change for the city manager of the commission through the emergency services. So this would really be kind of setting the term of that emergency.
So this would just be the resolution to put it in place in namesake then?
I do have a question, Linda Morse, Katie, and that is about section 1 at the bottom of page 1 of the draft resolution. And the very last words are, which includes the city of Manhattan's plan. And I wasn't sure we had a plan. I mean, the city administration has a plan for internal operations during an emergency. But is there a plan? The city doesn't have a plan. That's why we're doing some of this, is there is no plan for the city as a whole. Would you clarify that? Maybe I'm not thinking like I should.
This is City Manager Ron Fear. Our emergency plan is a countywide emergency plan, and that we are a member and part of that emergency plan. There is no separate city emergency plan.
So does this need to be altered, is my question, if we don't have one? I don't know.
I don't think it does, but we could certainly clarify it if
take a look
that's
at it,
something we can visit about with
Yeah.
our Fire Services Director, Scott French, and provide some clarification and further explanation of that.
Well, if our city attorney says, and you say it's fine, it's okay. I just was questioning the language when I knew we didn't have one, not a standalone anyway. Okay.
I do think it needs clarification because it says contradict or conflict with. And when we did the face mask ordinance, it was in conflict with what the county emergency plan was. So I don't know, that's what I'm thinking. But either way, Commissioner Estabrook.
Yes, to potentially save Katie some trouble, I don't know that, I don't see why we would be passing a resolution at the next meeting unless the conditions change between now and then, to declare an emergency for the city. So that's where my position is. My position is, I've learned from this discussion, and if the county commission fails to work as the Board of Health, then the conditions change and the city has an opportunity, if it's even necessary, to declare an emergency. But that's what I mean by shirking the county, giving them a way out. I would rather them do or not do and us take action based on that, rather than giving them a way, saying we're going to declare an emergency. I'm not for declaring an emergency at the next meeting unless something changes between now and then.
I almost think Linda Morse, I almost think the county was waiting to see what we did.
And I'm tired of that.
And so maybe you're right about if they do nothing or don't engage, maybe that's.
They're not going to do it. This is,
Every time I've watched the county commission, it's the two commissioners talking about, well, we'll wait and see what the city is going to do. I would encourage them to take care of themselves. And until then, until they fail to do that, I'm not gonna declare an emergency and take action based on, without the advice of the public health officer.
And I feel like that's a standoff.
Yeah, I
And
think
we
that's-
need to pursue our own path in the absence of their inaction. So, I mean, we can disagree, that's okay.
I think that's disappointing because we're going to get thousands of students this weekend. The Riley County Commissioners are going to do what Riley County can. I'm not here to make them do anything.
Well, can I
This is
ask a
us
clarifying
taking
question, Mayor? Then if we're getting thousands of students, why did K-State not ask us to declare an emergency?
K-State
I
does
think
not
this
have
is
the
part of the
authority.
plan. It's not an emergency unless there's an outbreak, which there may or may not be. Logic points that there's going to be an increase in cases, but that is the Board of Health's responsibility. And that, if they're not, weighing those options with K-State and others, then they're failing. But they haven't, if they've been publicly failing, it hasn't been public. I mean, if privately failing in those discussions and neglecting that duty, I don't see it publicly.
Most of the things we do are preventive measures. And Kansas State University has had lots of conversations with the Riley County Commissioners, with Julie Gibbs, and with city commissioners as well. What we are doing right here is not to see how somebody else is going to conduct themselves, what they're going to do. We have students already coming. We have a lot ahead of us. We have no strategies. We need to take some preventive measures, and that might not, that's not gonna, you can't
But
wait for somebody to
Prevention's not
leave.
an emergency. And I think that is the difference in our way we're looking at this. I understand the concern, and it is true, and we should be doing all we can to sound the alarm without being alarmist, but declaring an emergency next week or in the next 10 days or whatever from the city is only going to confuse the heck out of everybody in the community. That now the city's declaring it's going to create a panic, and a way that it gets us almost nothing in return, because we can still extend a mask ordinance, we can still do other ordinances. It doesn't do anything except create public confusion unless there is a difference between now and then, from my understanding of the public health and the EOC. EOC has not asked us to declare an emergency.
The EOC hasn't asked us to do anything.
The clinical task force recommended the mask ordinance.
County ignores that too.
I'm just saying,
I worry about.
I
the
think we're in
direction-
position to act if there's an
I
emergency.
think we need to do something because there is public panic already. You may not be speaking to anybody out there about it. There is concern about schools opening. There is concern about football starting. There is concern about students coming into town. And we have zero preventive measures. And we need to do something instead of waiting for others to do things for us and then react.
What does-
Commissioner Reddy, as Ron said, our emergency action plan is based on the county one. And I guess you keep saying we need to do something. How about laying that out? What do you want to do? Lock down the city again? Do you want to close the bars? Do you want K-State to send all the students home? I mean, we've already got a mask ordinance that's in place till September 7th, and I'm sure you'll probably extend it till Christmas. I mean, a lot of people expect that. But what I want to know is, you want to put this new thing in place, and then what is step 2? We need to do something. What does that do something mean?
And
We're
that's
gonna
exactly
close
what
down the
we-
playgrounds, like we did the pools, or are we gonna shut down the bars? Are we gonna kill the rest of business? Which is what Commissioner, Hadisall has mentioned. That's what's underlying here. It's not the fact that there's an emergency. Clearly, if a tornado comes through here and trashes part of the city, we're gonna declare an emergency, we're gonna fix it, because we can get our handle on that. The point here is, people are really worried about this. That's the messages I've got. You're gonna declare an emergency and you're gonna do something. What in your mind do you want to do that we haven't already done?
There are a lot of discussions we need to have still about all of the things we still need to do. Doing nothing is not going to be an option. It is just not going to be an option.
Okay, what is this list of things we could do?
I didn't say there was a list.
Well, you said you had several things we could do. I'm curious, and that's the bottom line of all of this is, I know it just kills you that you haven't, as the mayor and the city commission, we haven't had any power for the most part during this whole thing, because it all falls under the county health department and county commission and stuff like that. So I think that's a legitimate question, is like, what is it that you think you'd want to try to put into place? And if you're not willing to say it now, don't wait until after you've done it to say, okay, well, now that we've got this in place, here's the things that I could do. Is it things that have been tried before, do you want to re-implement, or things that have been done before that you want to tighten down harder? Or have you got some new bright idea that hasn't been tried that is the surefire solution? And if you don't have anything, that's
I
fine, but
think
then we
your
don't.
aggressive accusations are out of place. You're accusing us of doing things that we aren't doing. And so
What
I'd
do you
like to
envision of
have-
doing?
I would like to have calm conversations with mutual respect and not any bullying or calling people names or flame throwing. Oh my God, the sky is falling. I think that we just need to have some reasonable conversations.
We're going to disagree, Mark.
I'm just
We're going to
curious as to
disagree.
what the plan is, but if we don't, we can wait on it.
Okay, no, I'm not saying I have a grandiose plan. And as far as doing things, yeah, we did do the face mask ordinance. That took a long time to happen. This isn't about me being hungry for power. It is about public health, though. And that's where we're going to disagree. We're going to fundamentally disagree on how to handle this public health crisis. That is one thing we are going to agree on. This is not a power grab of any kind. This is something, like I said, not having a plan or not having anything in place, yes, that really does bother me. What are the solutions? I would like to work towards some of those solutions. But doing nothing right now is going to have everything shut down much faster than you realize. If we have students coming in right now and we have about, let's say they tested 4,500 people, 10% of the 4,500 tested positive, which is about 470 whatever we have, right? That's 10%. We have about 122 active cases, so we know that much. Extrapolate that to 15,000, okay? Maybe 10% of those might get tested and test positive. What do we do? I mean, what kind of actions do we take? We need to think towards that. If you don't want to do the resolution, that's okay, but the point being, we can't just sit here and come and talk about Aggieville Garage and all of these other plans for the future if we shut down in the next month. And that's what I'm trying to stop, is a shutdown. I don't want to be in control of a shutdown. That's not going to come from me.
So I guess we know that they're not in support of this. So like what I don't know is what this would achieve, because I think the work that you're doing with the task force, the work that all the different committees, there's a lot with K-State, all of that is working. And if there are things that are concerning to the level of an emergency, I would like to spend time talking about those in not necessarily now, but as far as instead of this going forward, because what we learned tonight is this declaration does nothing to prevent us from from doing those things, unless of course we need to broaden out that scope, like Katie said. So if that's where we're going to, we should talk about that rather than starting with the end result, which is a declaration of emergency, and then prescribing. I would
That's
rather go
the
through the
first.
process of if we need to do these other ordinances, or if the county is lacking in this way, or whatever it is that within the geographical limits of the city that we need to do, let's lay those out. If we have to bundle them together with the emergency declaration, let's look at that together, but just a blanket declaration and then try.
Yeah, I agree with that, Aaron. You're right on track. Like, and I'm trying to give a specific example because we keep talking around the issue. But let's say, for instance, as Commissioner Reddy's predicting, the worst happens. K-State brings in a bunch of students, and we get so many patients we can't house them. at the hospital. We declare this emergency, we take the funds that the city has, we rent a hotel, we quarantine people. We've talked about this before, back in March when we thought we were gonna have disaster. I can fully understand that. But you have to have the problem first, and right now, we're anticipating a problem, but we can't put our finger on what we're anticipating. And the only thing I can see is and I hope Commissioner Reddy's not right, that all the students come back and we have this huge spike. If that's the case, then the recommendation ought to be to have General Myers not open K-State, which would be another economic problem for the city. Nobody wants to hear that. But if we're gonna be pandemic central because all these students are coming back, then the right preemptive measure for public health would be not to open the university. But I'm not for that at all. So I think you're 100% on track. Let's wait till we have a problem before we try to solve it. That's my whole point on tampering.
It takes so
You
long
need
to
to
pass
be-
resolutions.
You can't be reactive. You must have something in place. You don't declare a disaster in this kind of a pandemic. It's already happening.
But can
Everybody's
we-
already declared a disaster.
What are we not doing today that we could be doing is what I guess, and I'm not trying to say it in an accusatory way because I want to be doing those things. And this doesn't get us there. This doesn't achieve anything other than declaring an emergency unless there's something behind, tangible steps behind it. I want to get to those steps if they're needed and necessary based on the information you have and have shared. I don't know what those are beyond what we've already discussed about face mask so that is where I'm at, and not an accusatory way that not to mean that. I just want to know the details, and I'm open to doing it for sure, but I'm not open to doing it kind of in reverse because of just the lack of, of course, the headlines, and everybody's going to say the city declared an emergency, 8 months into a pandemic, with decrease in cases or something. Like, it's going to not make a difference in that term. If there is a way to bundle it with outcomes that we want to achieve through ordinances or through whatever, then that's what I would like to spend more time talking about.
So what you're saying is, when we find a reason, you would like to pass the parallel declaration of emergency and have them go through at the same time.
Sure, as Katie outlined,
That's important to say.
the regulation, what the city can do is expand regulation, of
Right.
course, and do we want to, we don't even need this emergency declaration to do that, based on, and it gives us a framework to build around to defend, but it isn't necessary, from what I heard. So,
You're sending mixed signals, when.
what the mixed signal of what are we declaring an emergency for if we don't have anything to show for it other than we declared an emergency?
This also steps us away from the Riley County Commissioners, which is what we keep saying we need to wait for them to do. We can't wait for something to be reactive to it. Like I said, everybody's already declared an emergency. If we don't want to do this, that's fine, but the rationale is being proactive and preventive is essential more than being reactive, saying, oh, now we have a spike of 600 cases, let's do something. I think we know if you cannot see what's in front of us, we have a bigger problem. If we don't see what we are walking into, and that's what I'm understanding is that we are waiting for things to happen when we clearly know it's going to happen.
We now had us all here. We don't clearly know. We know there's probably going to be an increase in cases, but almost all of the young people that have got them this summer have been cured by staying at home and resting. And like all sick people should do, they should go home and get better. I don't think there's going to be any big spike in hospitalizations if 400 college students get the COVID. There might be 3 because of the ones that had underlying health conditions of some kind, but that is exactly the point. It would look stupid to declare a disaster 8 months into a pandemic. Oh, we finally figured out that there's a disaster happening. But if there's 600 cases and the hospital gets overrun, then we could call a special meeting, call a local disaster, and then do whatever it is that you think this framework would allow us to do. But right now, Katie talks like the only reason for it is to justify whatever ordinances we pass, especially if there's not a state or a county one in place. And so that's the last word I'll have.
I think maybe we need to talk to Kansas State University. They do have some mechanisms, numbers, at levels they will be considering a shutdown, and it has nothing to do with hospitalizations. So maybe that's a conversation
Yeah,
we need to have.
that's an example
Because-
that I wish we had, and I'm sorry to jump in.
But why are we not, I mean, do you
But
not
those
see
are
this coming?
But what's the
USD
plan
383 is
of,
doing it.
even when USD 383 reaches 10% test rate for the week, then they go to remote only. That's an economic impact. That's something Commissioner Hattasol talks about. Childcare regulations, things like that. Things that we can do to tangibly help the community rather than saying something bad is going to happen. I'd rather have some things, and we all know, I think we all know that something potentially bad is going to happen. Let's get those results. Let's get the outcomes and try to do the prevention around those metrics you just described.
Well, we're talking in circles.
What I'm hearing is that basically the majority of the commission feels we shouldn't declare a tornado emergency until the tornado hits.
Yes, that
That's
is
the
exactly what
analogy.
you're hearing.
So when the tornado hits, we declare a tornado emergency. If this thing gets worse, then we consider this. But as of right now, I don't think there's 3 people that want to go the route of declaring an emergency now.
You're absolutely right. There aren't 3 votes to go forward with the resolution. I think that's sad, and it's extremely disappointing because we have a lot to work on, and we need a document in place, a resolution in place to speak to some of these items as they come before us, instead of saying, it's already happened, let's do something now.
Last word. Okay. The problem is that wolf has been being cried for 4 months now, and while there was some peaks and valleys, there was never the influx that happened that we were promised back in March when everybody shut everything down. And so now, there's no guarantee that this wolf is going to show up this fall, and we can't keep saying that it's going to, because it could have if it was going to happen, I think it surely would have happened before people started taking precautions. And now that there's a lot of precautions in place, we can't say for sure that there's going to be a disaster. And that's, I think, all the point is right now is if there gets a disaster and everybody else is ignoring it, then I will sign on to vote for it too at that point.
And last word for those in the audience. I'm starting to hear from the commission that this is some kind of last final stand. It's fluid. This morning I woke up and thought we wouldn't have college football. During this meeting, the Big 12 said we'll have college football. So what's going to happen over the next 3 months, or none of us are qualified to predict the future in that way. And but what you're saying about doing things, how does not doing this resolution prevent us from doing other things? Why can't we move full steam ahead on all those other things? This resolution doesn't trigger or prevent us from doing that, right? Am I misunderstanding?
When you declare an emergency for anything, is because there's an emergency. Any ordinances we pass would be covered under that umbrella of an emergency for the ordinance. We certainly don't have to have it, but what it means is stepping away from the county so that we have a process or something we will be doing that the county may or may not agree to, or the local health officer may or may not agree to. But we cannot just wait for somebody else to do that for us. If you believe this is an emergency, and I do believe, not only believe, I know it's an emergency. This is not a belief system. And we already know the discussions that was happening about football is just that elevated, because that's how much of the conversation is happening, is because they are thinking so deeply about each of those individual players coming in face-to-face contact with another player. That's why 2 of them opted out, and there's 3 of them going forward. Those are high-level discussions which impact their own local economies more than they do the Manhattan economy. So if those things are going to happen, we need to look at some mitigating circumstances that we alone have to act as opposed to somebody else.
I'll make one suggestion. As somebody that was on the school board or was looking in from the outside at this commission as you worked through the flood, and it felt like there was some updates and some work and some things that was happening along that process. And of course, it's easier that's a different type of disaster. But what I would think would be appropriate is that in work sessions going forward and meetings going forward, that there is time set aside to discuss proactive measures, but not, this all or nothing type of feeling that I get right now. I'd rather us continue the dialogue. This isn't the last time that we talk about this, hopefully, and that it doesn't depend on just this emergency.
It doesn't. We're going to continue having the dialogues. What I'm saying is, how can you have a dialogue about emergency status ordinances, which will continue?
The Riley County Commission we're in a state of an emergency from the governor and the county until December 31st for the county. Until that expires, I don't know, like that's just a side issue. I don't understand.
I'm not going to argue about
Okay.
this. I definitely feel differently about it. I do feel it is an emergency. This month is going to be very testing on all of us as city commissioners. We have a community that we need to take care of. And I don't want to waste time arguing about it, but I do believe we are in a state of emergency, even for the city of Manhattan. August is going to be very telling. We may not even make it to September and October if we don't be cautious. So I guess for you, Ron, maybe you don't need to work on this as well as Katie. So was there a public comment? I'm sorry, you waited a long time. Did you want to speak to this issue? Okay, please come on forward, say your name and address, and is this what you came for? I just want to make sure.
Yes.
Okay.
I'd like to compliment all of you. I think we all want the same thing. My name is Michael Walter at 2921 Arbor Drive. I think we want readiness. I think we want calm. I think we want our freedoms. I think we want safety. I learned a lot this evening, thank you. I believe that the community needs to be behind us. And I think they will be after the tornado happens, unfortunately. And we certainly want the community behind us. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you for waiting so long.
Question is, what is that?
Okay, with that, sorry?
I said the question is, what is that threshold? Thank you.
Thank you. With that, we are adjourned.